Now, believe me, there are plenty of reasons to blame the left, but there are a lot of problems that come from the right too. I do believe that a lot of the left is comprised of crazies. I do believe a lot of chaos comes from the left, but I'll tell you right now, I think the rise in technocracy is being supported by the right. I mean, this is one of the roles that I think Trump is playing. Look at what Trump did with warp speed. Why Trump? Biden would have never gotten warp speed to go. I mean, people would have rejected it, right? Well, now look at what's happening with, we have a government that is largely subsidized and managed by Palantir and other assorted corporations. There's a lot that the right can do and that individuals that consider themselves to be on the right will support that the other side wants. So, I mean, it's kind of, there's a reason that there's this tension sometimes that occurs dialectically, and why I think that is done deliberately with these types of ops that are carried out. So I do believe that this was an op. I do believe that this was a planned and executed hit.
You are listening to the Doc Malik podcast. This show is 100% independent and fully funded by listeners like yourself. So if you wish to support Ahmed in all that he is doing, then please subscribe to his channel on Spotify or his Substack. Or simply buy him a coffee with a one-off donation, links to which can be found at docmalik.com. Now, let's get on with the show.
There you go. Oh, my friend. Listen, this is the third time back for you, Mr. Brad Miller.
Yeah, sir. Repeat offender.
Repeat offender. Well, listen, no, look, I wanted to quickly hit the record so I could just start chatting to you. I've been looking forward to this. Listen, you know, there's not many of us around like you, and it's just such a joy because you speak common sense, you're rational, you're logical, you're objective, you see through all the nonsense, and you just got good stuff to say. And like, just so many people, you know, you think they got it, and then they just trip up at the end, and you go, oh, man, you too? I mean, like, for example, last night I got an email from someone saying, oh, do you know what? Can you shut down the comment section and delete the comments from the Substack because they're saying negative things about our podcast? And I'm like, I can't do that. Like, you want me to censor? You want me to censor my listeners and audience? Are you kidding me? And they're like, okay, just leave it as it is. Can you see yourself ever doing that? Like, imagine some people would come out and go, this guy's talking a lot of garbage. I don't like this guy. And then you message me in the middle of the night, go, hey, dude, turn off the comment section and delete the comments.
Yeah. I think somewhere along the way, people just have to realize it comes with the territory. There are going to be people who disagree. There are going to be people who rabidly disagree, vehemently disagree, and they're going to make it known. And again, it just comes with the territory. It is what it is.
Yeah. Anyway, listen, right? You sent me some stuff. You want to talk about some stuff. Tell me about this hearing about the army and the COVID. What's going on?
Yeah, I figure it's a good place to start, and then from there we can go wherever. But so here's what I would tell you is there's always plenty to talk about. There's plenty that's going on. So yesterday there was a hearing in the Pentagon, so in DC, for some individuals who had lost their careers due to the COVID shot mandate. And I think there were a couple people in attendance who may also still currently be serving. But anyway, ever since the COVID shot mandate was implemented now 4 years ago in the U.S. Department of Defense, there's been this kind of battle going on between Department of Defense and then those that were affected, those that were standing up and saying, hey, this is wrong. Hey, this is unlawful. Hey, this is going to hurt people. This is going to harm people. Hey, is this bigger than, is it bigger than just the shot mandate? Is there something else going on? Anyway, so there's been kind of this struggle going on now for 4 years. And so a lot of people lost their careers, one of whom was me. And clearly there were also many service members that have been injured, and I would even say killed because of the shots. So now we have a new administration in place. Now, my opinion on that is that not much has changed, but regardless, there's a new presidential administration in place. And at least ostensibly, they are trying to make it look as if the new administration and the new Secretary of Defense are trying to correct some of these issues. Now, remains to be seen whether or not that's actually true. But they have at least tried to implement some process to reinstate some of these individuals who lost their careers. Now, I think they've been extremely slow moving. I personally think that a lot of this is optics, but whatever, they have made some forward progress, though very slowly and very little progress. In any case, yesterday there was a meeting that was held in which some individuals were invited to come talk to senior defense officials and talk about their problems with the mandate, and then also the problems with how this reinstatement process has been very slow moving and doesn't seem to address the full scope of what happened. Now, here's where it gets interesting, and here's where I'm kind of involved. So I was personally invited to participate in this meeting about a month ago, and then 5 days afterwards, I was disinvited from the meeting. And that came down to, comments that I had made very publicly about President Trump. So that's really the primary reason that I was disinvited. And maybe even a secondary reason was because I had expressed concern with the new Secretary of Defense, and that I don't necessarily think that he is nearly as sincere as other individuals would like to believe he is. So anyway, so I got disinvited. The meeting did occur, and judging from the initial accounts of those who were in the meeting, it appeared to be positive. And I think what they would say is that the senior defense officials, who were largely in listening mode, they were listening to people from our side. They were expressing their concerns, which I think is good. So those who participated came out and said, hey, they listened to us. They seem eager to want to understand the problem. Of course, now we just got to see what happens from here. But it's interesting, though, because even within people that I considered to be on my side, those who are similarly affected, just like me, we often have kind of wildly divergent opinions as to the bigger picture of what is going on. And so some of the frustrations that I have felt is that, to put it in kind of military language, what I have tried to encourage people to realize is, hey, there's a lot at stake here. It's bigger than just the COVID shot mandate. It's even bigger than just the COVID operation. So let's be careful about the way that we frame our discussions, because to put it in military language, we don't want to end up trading tactical victories for strategic losses. So, and I'll give you an example. I personally, I don't like it when this particular issue, the reinstatement policy for those who were, lost their careers due to COVID, and then reinstating them into service if they choose to come back. I don't like framing that issue as a Biden versus Trump thing, as in Biden bad, Trump good, because as you well know, and you and I have talked about this, but I think that is largely an illusion. So if that's kind of the way that we approach this, then I think we're already framing it in a way that is A, fake, but B, also unhelpful, and C, can cause further problems down the road, because you have a lot of people who begin to think that, oh, this new administration gets it. It's on the side of the people. They're trying to correct everything that the previous administration did that was wrong. And I think that there are plenty of things right now that the Trump administration is doing that are incredibly dangerous, and people are wary or reluctant to either A, recognize it, or B, say it.
And why do you think that is?
I think probably you got a full spectrum of reasons. I think on the one hand, I think a lot of people they don't see it, they don't recognize it. And here's why I think that is. I think that's because I think people they're so confused, and I think this has all been done deliberately, by design. They are inundated with information. They find it very difficult to sift through competing sources, competing narratives. There are cognitive disconnects that occur, and I don't just mean just cognitive dissonance, but I mean just in general, people they struggle. So I think when you're placed in that situation, what can often happen, and it may even happen at a subconscious level that people don't readily recognize, but a lot of people, they just resort to following the path of least resistance, which we all have a human tendency to do. Now, they don't necessarily know that they're doing it. They don't necessarily admit to themselves that they're doing it. But here's what that looks like. What it looks like is, I'm just going to do what I'm told by the authority figures. That's what that looks like. But in reality, what you're doing is you're just following the path of least resistance. So if you're being lied to by those authority figures and you choose to listen to them anyway, then you're not going to end up in a good place.
No. All right. Can I quickly ask you something about the people who are invited to this DOD thing? Like, how many people were invited?
I don't know exactly, but maybe a dozen, give or take.
Oh, so not very many.
No, small group.
And in terms of ranking, like, what kind of rank were they?
Everywhere from lower enlisted individuals up to individuals kind of at the lieutenant colonel or colonel rank. Now, again, most of these are already out, but those would have been the ranks that they would have held in the service. So yeah, kind of a wide range of ranks.
So in terms of like you, like what are the different ranks? Like you're quite high up. You're a lieutenant colonel. You're a lieutenant colonel of the 101st. Like how many ranks are above you? And what are they?
Yeah, so the next higher rank would be colonel. And then above that would be 1-star general, which is a brigadier general. Above that, a 2-star general, which is a major general. Above that, a 3-star general, which is a lieutenant general. And then above that, a 4-star general, which is just a general. Now, you'd have corresponding ranks in the Navy. A lieutenant colonel would be equivalent to a commander in the Navy. A colonel would be equivalent to a captain. And then instead of the 1 to 4-star generals, you would have 1 to 4-star admirals.
Yeah, I get that. So you got your captain, your major, lieutenant colonel, brigadier general, major general, lieutenant general, 1-star, 2-star, 3-star, all that kind of stuff. Okay. Yeah. All right. So you're like, you're not like a private, you're not a sergeant, you're not any of that stuff. I mean, you're an officer. Are there any officers above your rank who are dissidents?
Yes, but very, very, very few. In fact, one of I would say a phenomenon that we kind of recognized all along was that the lieutenant colonel rank seemed to be the highest rank at which you had a group of individuals that were willing to speak out. Now, were there any colonels who spoke out? Yes, but incredibly few. And like I mean incredibly few.
Like how many? You name them.
Maybe I could count them on one hand.
Can you name them?
Across the whole force.
Yeah. Can you name them?
Yeah. I mean, there's a guy out there that I know who was a colonel in the Air Force whose name is JJ McAfee. I mean, he's on Twitter. He's a really good guy. There are others that I have had less. He's probably the one that I've had the most interaction with. I know that there are others out there, but yeah, it's he's the one that I can readily name off the top of my head that I know is a good guy. Now he and we don't necessarily agree on everything, but he's a good guy. He's a sincere guy.
And what about things like generals or anything? Any of those? Lieutenant generals?
No. Now here's what I can tell you. There is a 1-star general from the Air Force who, shortly after being promoted to 1-star general, was basically forced into retirement because of a refusal to comply with the mandate. And this individual, since leaving the Air Force, to my knowledge, I could be wrong about this, but to my knowledge, has never really spoken up publicly about what happened. And I do have a problem with that, because an individual at that rank would almost become the de facto leader of the circles of people who are trying to resist a lot of what is going on. And to my knowledge has completely shied away from that role. And on the one hand, it's like, okay, well, if you don't want to be the, informal kind of leader of this group just because of your rank when you were in, okay, that's fine. But at least stand up. Resist, speak out publicly. And this individual, to my knowledge, again, and I don't know this individual and haven't really had interaction with this individual, but I'm aware of their existence. And I believe that if this individual had spoken out, it would be loud. It would, because of the rank held during their time in service. And for whatever reason, they've chosen not to do so.
Hi, everybody. Sorry for the interruption. I don't know why I'm saying sorry. It's my podcast, and I need to advertise my consultation service. As you know, folks, I don't have any sponsors. How many big podcasts do you know of that don't have any sponsors? I'm supported by you, the tiny percentage who subscribe to my Substack or my Spotify paid channel. So to those few of you, I just want to say thank you so much. I love you. And hopefully the ones of you who are listening for free, you're still helping by rating the show 5 stars and spreading it on your social media far and wide, whether it's on Facebook, Instagram, your WhatsApp groups or whatever. Please introduce them to my podcast. Hopefully some of them will subscribe to my channel. But I also want to take this opportunity to talk about my one-to-one consultation service I'm offering. Now, I'm not acting as your doctor or diagnosing and treating you, in which case some of you might be thinking, well, what the heck are you doing? What kind of consultation is this? Folks, if only you knew, I'm about advocating for your healthcare needs. I'm about educating you, empowering you, helping you navigate the minefield that's the sick care system. I'm helping you ask the right questions from your doctor, to get the best out of your consultation, to answer your unanswered questions, and to give you a second opinion, and so much more. I can prepare you for surgery. I can give you alternative views on different treatments. I can introduce you to other healthcare practitioners. But listen, enough of what I'm saying. Let's look at 2 reviews from today. There's Matt. I've learned so much from Doc Malik by listening to his podcast interviews. I felt he could help me with my personal health and well-being during a stressful time in my life, and he didn't disappoint. He offered me some great advice concerning a wide range of things, including diet, lifestyle, sleep, physical activity, and trauma, and he also guided me to other sources of help. He is a fountain of wisdom with a massive heart and has stepped up to help people properly in the way that your typical doctor does not. Thank you, Doc. Well, no, thank you, Matt, for a lovely review. And then secondly, Eloise. Not only does this man have what appears to me an incredible depth and breadth of true knowledge, he has the biggest heart. I felt so genuinely cared for around sensitive health issues that I may not ordinarily wish to speak about. A consultation is a trusted, safe space which was essential for me as I've tried everything under the sun and I'm aware of my own blocks. This straight-talking, caring approach ensures you leave the consultation with a no-nonsense, clear plan on what's important to change, how to go about it, and recommendations of other specialists in the field where Doc Malik believes you would benefit from. He is considerate of costs, so offers multiple ways to go about protocols to get the best for you without spending a fortune unnecessarily. The mental relief I got from this consultation was, in fact, priceless. So there you go, folks. Don't take it from me. If this resonates with you, check out my website, docmalik.com/consultations. Have a look. And if you think that, there's a calling there, book a consultation with me. Right, folks. Back to the show. Thank you for taking time to listen. I love you loads. So much. And honestly, for the recent listeners who've left Apple reviews and 5-star ratings on Spotify, I see you. I see what you've done, and I'm very grateful. Thank you, folks. God bless. Bye-bye.
In the military, and I mean, you know this. I mean, one of the traits that is considered to be the most important, right, is courage, the willingness to sacrifice. So I have a problem with people who show an unwillingness to do that when we are faced with something that is almost of existential importance. And I think you recognize that. I recognize that we're talking about things that are of existential importance. So in some ways, it's more important than whatever you were engaged in while you were in the military. And I even say that for people who might have deployed to combat situations, and it may not look exactly the same. And there may not necessarily be that kind of acute danger where you could get shot. But it is just as dangerous in a physical sense, because, of course, we have seen there are people who have lost their lives because of this war that we now find ourselves in. So I do have a problem with people who dedicated decades of their lives in the military. They kind of wake up to some degree to what's going on. They leave the service, but then they are silent on what's going on. And to me, I do have a problem with that, because to some degree, silence is consent.
Yeah, buddy. I mean, there's similar parallel with medicine. I mean, you do wonder whether this Air Force general was, someone leaned on them. I mean, anything could happen. But the similar parallel, you talk about in the army, it's about showing bravery and courage. I mean, that's the whole point of being a soldier. Hoorah!
Right.
Face of the enemy. Get in there.
Yeah.
I mean, the similar kind of thing is with doctors. We do first no harm to the patient.
Sure.
The reason we're respected is we don't think about our bottom line, our pocket. It's all about patient confidentiality, medical ethics, bodily autonomy, informed consent. Patient first. First do no harm. Yeah. And it's like, well, there's complete dereliction of duty there. Like, what the fuck happened? Like, where was that?
Yeah, absolutely. A dereliction of duty. What happened? What
happened?
And here's the other thing, and I'll be curious to get your thoughts on this because I bet you've seen this too. So here is another thing that I see as we kind of, so here we are, we're kind of getting closer to the end of 2025, right? So we're moving further and further from, the spring of 2020 when all this kind of started to happen. So one thing that I noticed that I do not like is a lot of people that kind of started to wake up to what was happening with the whole COVID operation. In my mind, many of them have started to go back to sleep. They've almost slipped back into that trance. And that's problematic. And in my mind, what that means is you didn't quite go far enough. You think that what happened with COVID is a one-off. And you don't see all the preparatory steps that happen to lead up to and permit something like COVID to happen. The whole when I say COVID, I mean like the whole operation, and therefore you don't necessarily see what may be coming down next because I don't think we're done. I think that the same players are already planning to orchestrate, whatever is going to come next.
Can I ask you something? How old are you?
Yeah. What's up?
How old are you?
45. Yeah, I'll be 46 in a month.
All right. Okay. Do you ever watch any Star Trek Next Generation type stuff? Did you ever watch any of those episodes?
A little bit. Yeah, yeah.
Do you remember that episode where there's like this scorpion type thing, and if it went inside you into your mouth or your neck, it would take over your body? Do you remember that episode?
I don't remember that particular episode. No. But
All right. I'm going to do a Substack on this. So basically, what happened was this parasite took over the whole of the ship and the fleet, and the whole whatever it's called, the Star Trek Federation, took over the Federation. All the top naval officers had this parasite, so they're walking, talking, looking like human beings, part of the Federation, when they're all serving this other agenda entity. They've been taken over, right? They've been captured. I feel like that's where we are now. Like, your military, our military, they're not protecting us from foreign enemies or domestic enemies. If you look at our intelligence agencies, our apparatus, CIA or NSA or MI5, MI6, they're not protecting our countries from foreign and domestic enemies. They're actually agents for them. They're treasonous.
I completely agree.
They're the fifth column. If you look at our politicians, it's the same. If you look at the media, it's the same. None of these people are serving our countries. They're all acting in a way that's treasonous and traitorous. And it's like they've got this little thing in their head, this Star Trek alien that's now taken over their body. And so they look like us. And superficially, you think they're on our side. And actually, they're working for the enemy. And I feel like at all the top levels, that's what's happened. And it's fucking scary. Scary, dude.
Yeah. So it's a good metaphor. You bring up the Star Trek, that analogy, because you're right. It is kind of, that does appear to be, to some degree, what's happening. So, I was talking to some of my friends because, so these people who participated in this meeting that I was just talking about, the one that occurred yesterday. So, from our side, those who participated, they're all good people, very sincere. And they understand this reinstatement issue. They understand the problems with it. Where I disagree with them, though, is that I disagree with their big picture assessments, because the point that you just made Unfortunately, with a lot of these individuals, it would be lost on them. And so when I talk about DOD, if we just use DOD as an example, understanding that the Department of Defense is just one part of the government and the U.S. government is just, one part of what's happening in the whole world. And this is a worldwide phenomena, that you're talking about. So, but what I say is, we can't look for a small fix here or there. We need deep, fundamental structural reform. And the reason I say that is because when I mention structural reform, it's because there is another structure. There's another hierarchy, like a command hierarchy, a decision-making hierarchy that is totally different than the one that we constitutionally recognize and openly interact with. But that secret, invisible command hierarchy, to use that term, is the true decision-making apparatus. And the government that we readily recognize, the one that we think we're interacting with, is completely subordinate to this other command hierarchy that operates from the shadows. And so that's what I kind of mean, just to put it in language that maybe people can understand when I'm talking about deep structural reform is, well, first, we have to acknowledge the existence of this other hierarchical structure that is out there, even if you can't necessarily touch it and feel it the way you may be able to with your government that you recognize. So there is a command hierarchy, a system of governance that is different than our government,
You nailed it. So I just want to go back to my little thing. So this was the episode, and guess what it's called? It was called Conspiracy. Star Trek Next Generation Conspiracy. And that's the little scorpion thing. And you ate it, and it would attach to your brain stem. And in that episode, the Next Generation episode Conspiracy, a bug-like parasite takes over Starfleet higher-ups by attaching to their brain stems, leading to a plot to infiltrate the Federation. And what I'm trying to say is, I'm not saying literally this bug thing is happening, but if you take that parasite, now convert that into a mind virus, this mind virus and mind governance system is acting like that bug and has taken over the minds of our troops, our politicians, our journalists, our fucking professors, doctors, everything. And now they're behaving like this hive, serving a very different master than us, the citizens, the people. You know what I mean? It's really, how do we crack it? That's what I don't understand.
Yeah, that is the question, because there's some competing ideas here, and I wrestle with this a lot, as I'm sure you do, and much of your audience probably does as well. Because on the one hand, you think to yourself, you can't just overwhelm people with information, because, I've been studying a lot of this stuff since 2007. And the reason I say 2007 is because that's when I started to really look into 9/11. And by the way, I think 9/11 was a known and deliberate precursor to the COVID op, by the way. I think that was maybe even known by those who orchestrated it at the time, that something like that would be necessary to then allow for something much bigger that would be, the COVID op 2 decades later. But anyway, so, I've been studying this for a long time. There are other people who've been studying this for a long time, and you build your base of knowledge and your understanding incrementally over many years of research. And you can't take all of that and then shove it into somebody else's head, because of course they will reject a lot of it. And even after I started to wake up, there's no way that I would have been prepared in 2009 or 2010 to understand things that I understand now. So on the one hand, I recognize that. But on the other hand, here's the other problem, is that sometimes I ask myself, are we working to preserve and secure our liberties at a rate that is faster than the rate at which the technocracy is coming? So if you were to chart both of those on a graph, what would they look like? So because part of me fears that, man, the slow incremental approach may be too slow,
Yeah.
That we've got to move faster. We got to get more people to wake up and move along faster. We got to get more people to start bleeding the parasitic systems, start bleeding them dry, right? And putting energy into some of these other parallel systems that are better for us, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. So here in the UK, I keep seeing videos of people who've done nothing being arrested. Oh, you were supporting Palestine Action, a now deemed terrorist organization. And, like they're little kids or whatever. And you got police officers and anti-terrorist officers turning up and taking these kids away. And you just think, hold on a second. Like, what's wrong with these police officers? Have they got this little mind virus in them? Can't they? How can they sleep at night? Don't they think, what the fuck are we doing here? What are we doing taking this kid, reading the anti-terrorist act to him? Like, what the fuck? He's not a terrorist. What are we doing locking this kid up when there's illegals running around, the country, where there's illegals shacked up in hotels and hostels, and our borders are not secure? Like, that's a real and present danger, where we've got, these God knows illegals trying to groom young girls and rape them or whatever. That's a problem, where you've got the government acting in the interest of another foreign country and putting their interest before our own. Why are you not doing something about that? Like, what the fuck is this little kid done anything? And like, I just see them, and they're going through the motions, and it's like they've all got this little Star Trek parasite in their brain, and they're all acting for the blob. And it's like, we're in deep shit. Like, no, I don't feel like we're making much progress. Anyway, let's go back a bit. So in terms of the officers, they've gone to the DOD, they've spoken there. The DOD have listened. Yeah, I'd be really interested what happens next. I mean, the thing is, I think a lot of this is just pacification, and there should be outrage. There should be massive compensation, not a listening exercise. There's nothing really to listen. You reinstate these guys. You reinstate them, promote them, give them compensation, and apologize. That's what needs to be done. Not a listening exercise. And then another 2-3 years from now, something might happen. That's not good enough. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I completely agree. The other thing is, of course, there is the concern that this is all just being done for optics. And here's another thing, and this is what I've tried to kind of share my perspective with people on my side. Here's one of the things that I've tried to share with them is, some people will look at this, like this meeting, for example, or things like that, and they will say, hey, that's just a limited hangout, okay? And which is, of course, is a legitimate concern. And then there are others who will say, no, but this is kind of where you have to start. You have to establish some common ground, and you can't go in all oppositional, antagonistic. You got to establish some common ground, and then you solve the easy problems first, and then you move towards the harder, more difficult problems. Well, here's the trick. There is that both of those approaches in the beginning will look the same. So if it's a limited hangout, you'll kind of establish common ground. You'll start with the easy problems, but then there will become a limit where you're not going to be allowed to progress past that, because it was all for optics, or because they were going to make very small concessions to you, but then that's it, And so in the beginning, it will look the same. It's just, okay, but will we be allowed to progress past a certain point? So, and I'm always skeptical, because in my mind, you're dealing with the organization that, at least in the collective, the organization very openly and actively committed treason against the people, against the Constitution. And on the one hand, I realize that it's not organizations that commit crimes, it's people that do. And I get that. I understand that difference, but it was the people that run the organization, and the organization in the collective, trampled constitutionally protected rights, forced people to take these shots. The entire distribution plan, Operation Warp Speed, was a militarized endeavor. So, I mean, there's a lot for us, of course, to be skeptical about. I mean, our skepticism is well grounded.
Yeah. Earlier, you said that there were some things that Trump had done, that are not good. Before you say before you say that, Some people say to me, but he's doing so much good. One of my close friends is Dr. Stephen Frost. He's like, oh, but Trump is doing so many great things. Is he doing great things? And if he is doing great things, what are those great things?
Yeah, I get the same type of pushback from people that I respect and people that I think are sincere. So this is my assessment, my opinion. So first of all, I think Trump was always controlled, to put it in language that people understand, because people, they like the idea of the deep state. So what I would say is he is and always was a deep state asset. Now, some people say, hey, this Trump is so much different than the previous Trump. They think that Trump from 2016 to 2020 was good, and now they think he's kind of gone off the rails. And I'm like, no, there's no difference. Did you forget that during the first administration he ran warp speed? I mean, and then for several years afterwards, he continued to publicly say that the COVID shots had saved 100 million lives. I mean, he literally said that for several years after the shots were distributed. So anyway, this is kind of my assessment, the abridged version of my assessment there. I think he was always controlled. People who have looked into his history at all, they know that he was bankrupt decades ago, and he was basically bailed out by the Rothschilds. So I think even in 2015, when he announced his campaign for the 2016 presidency, I think he was a controlled asset then. But I believe that there has been a massive influence operation to make the public think that he is this grand champion fighting against the deep state. Now, that term, the deep state, is pretty interesting because it originally comes from Turkey. And it was Professor Peter Dale Scott who took that term. It was meant to describe the situation in Turkey and kind of popularized it in the West to describe a lot of what was happening in Western governments, to include the US government. But that term did not gain wide currency, at least in terms of the kind of the everyday population, right? Until that first Trump campaign. And then you had this situation that was framed as Trump is the outsider, because he's a New York City businessman. He's not a politician. He's going to come in here and he's going to run the government like a business. And he's rich. They can't get to him because they can't buy him off because he's already a billionaire, So there were all these things that were kind of framed to make you think that he's the outsider and he's going to come in and he's going to smash the deep state. And I think some of the active measures that were used as part of this influence operation, and then look forward over the next decade, right, until you get to the point where we are now. I think these, the media attacks, the Mar-a-Lago raids. Remember the mugshot? There was that iconic photo, his mugshot. I think all of that, these were active measures in the influence operation. And then the one that I think is the cherry on top of the sundae is the completely staged, assassination attempt a year ago, which you and I already spoke about. And so I think all of that is meant to create this illusion that he is the enemy of the deep state when he's not. But what that does is it allows him to push forward these agenda items that nobody else could do. I mean, Biden could not have gotten the American people to buy off on warp speed. So when people say to me, but Trump never mandated the shots, I say it's different phases of the same operation. The distribution of the shots occurred under Trump, and that had to happen before the mandates could ever go into effect. You got to roll the shots out first, So I think that they, this nebulous they, the deep state, or whatever you want to use it. And I do believe that what we would call the American deep state is really just a colony of the worldwide, like, deep empire, that very much controls world leaders and is basically that invisible command hierarchy that I was talking about, to which our governments are clearly subordinate. But I think what has happened is they knew they had to give Trump some plausible deniability in order to bring him back for a second term. So they didn't want the mandate. And again, I'm speculating here, but they didn't want the mandates to occur under Trump. But they could have warp speed occur under Trump, probably because it could not have occurred under Biden. but the mandates occurred under Biden. Then there's the whole, the stolen 2020 election, January 6th. And the reason that I never got too wrapped up into that is because, like, how do you steal an election that is not free and fair to begin with, And so I've never been one of the people who got totally wrapped up into that, because I think that our elections were fake long before 2020. But I do have some sympathy with individuals there who are Trump supporters, because I do think that if you had genuinely polled Americans in 2020, in November of 2020, I do think that more people supported Trump than supported Biden. So I can understand the sentiment that people have about the stolen election. You don't hear me talk about that, because I think that's it's kind of a red herring in a way, right? But what did that do? It's part of the influence operation to make people think this is the empire striking back. The empire strikes back against Trump, and then it's like a movie. It's like a movie arc. And now you set up for, the return of the Trump Jedi in, 2024 or whatever, to come back and, smash the deep state. And now this is where we are now. So anyway, that was kind of my one over the world of how I think we've gotten to where we are in terms of Trump over the last decade.
Right. Well, let's touch upon the assassination attempt, the so-called assassination attempt. Very, very briefly. I mean, look, you're in the 101st. You fired, rifles, semi-automatic, AR-15 type things. You've fired off these rounds. With your knowledge, you weren't a medic. You were in the army, lieutenant colonel. You've got knowledge of weapons and ballistics. Do you think it's possible that a round could zip past his ear, graze it, it could bleed, and then it could heal without any scar?
No, I don't think there is a single element of the whole. When you look at the official recounting of events, in my mind, there's not a single part of it that makes sense. So if you want to look at it from a ballistic standpoint, or if you want to look at it from the kind of the medical piece, which I don't claim to be an expert on, but whatever. But if you want to look at it through that lens, or if you want to look at it through the lens of the actions of the Secret Service, there's not a single component there that makes any sense. Every single one of those, even
break it down
independently of the others, don't make sense.
Explain
All
it.
right, so let's start with the one that I think is the most obvious. So let's say you don't know anything about weapons, and let's say you don't have any medical knowledge, but let's just look at the actions of the Secret Service. Just common sense there tells you that they handled that not just a little bit wrong, but 100% wrong. So here's what I think should have happened. And I've never worked in private security or anything like that, and certainly not to the level of the Secret Service, but even just common sense. So whenever they're going to protect any principle, but certainly somebody like the President of the United States, first of all, they're going to have the entire perimeter secured to where there are not going to be any elevated positions that are not covered. So you would not be able to get a shooter within 150 yards or whatever the distance was that they're saying that the so-called shooter was. That is not going to happen. But also, once he is shot, the private security individuals, so not private security, but the Secret Service individuals, what they should have done was they basically should have dived on top of him, to ensure, just because you don't know if there are multiple shooters, you don't know if there is is the initial shot, is that a diversionary tactic and then something else is going to happen? Is there a bomb planted somewhere? You don't know. So they should dive on top of him. And then, of course, they should remove him instantly. And they should remove him to a predetermined secure site. And all of this would have been rehearsed, and all of this would have been known ahead of time, that if something happens, we're doing this. And then also, and this is what I think is the most crucial part, and I haven't worked in this world, so I'm not speaking from my own personal experience here, but from everything that I've read and everything that just makes sense, is at that moment, the principal, so in this case, Trump, the individual being protected, they're not in charge of the situation. So the way I understand it is, Trump can't overrule his his Secret Service when it comes to, no, I want to stay. It's like, no, something has happened. And they are now in charge of the situation, and they will remove him to whatever that previously identified secure location is. What is clearly not going to happen is where you're going to have a grouping of individuals who are going to stand around him. And while he stands there, and says, fight, 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 for what is clearly a photo op. I mean, it's just clear,
It's so clear. I mean, the thing is, anytime I've seen anyone get shot in the past, they disappear. Mm-hmm. There's just a swarm of protective bodyguards, and you never see the person again. They're gone. They're just gone.
Gone.
They're gone. And in this case, he gets up, and I would say this to people, and they'd be like, "Well, he's a big guy, and he's strong, and he got up." And it's like, hold on, you tell me this guy in his 70s is surrounded by Secret Service agents,
right?
Is able to overwhelm them and get enough. Don't be stupid. Like, see, and who's that young lady? That's the secret. Well, who the fuck is she? I mean, at some point when they're at the car, she's trying to put a gun in her holster, and she doesn't even get it right. Like, it's almost like she's an actress. Like, she's not even a proper Secret Service person. She can't even get a gun in her holster properly. I mean, and the fact that he got up and did his little photo shoot, like someone could have taken off another round. I mean, and then there's no investigation. There's no, like, why did this happen? How do we allow it to happen? How did the shooter get there? How did the Secret Service mess up? And like within a couple of weeks, it's like, it's all gone quiet. And it's just like, are you kidding me? The president was shot at, and the circus had just moved on. And it's in this tiny little town, you had the BBC and CNN or whatever live streaming. Like, when does that ever happen? In this hillbilly town, like, or wherever, in the middle of nowhere, inconsequential. You had the BBC there who have never been to any of these rallies before. It was just madness, but it just goes to show you how badly some people will want to believe.
Well, here's something that's really interesting. So I just heard this a couple of days ago from a friend of mine. And by the way, this friend is not quite at the point where she rejects the official narrative of this incident yet. But I would say she's maybe open to what you and I are saying. But a couple of days ago, she told me, because I was asking her about this, because she's heard me say many times, because I said it the day it happened, that it was staged. And I've only become more and more convinced of that over the last, year. Anyway, so she told me, she said, when I first saw the videos of it happening, and she's talking about on the day of, because, it was like all over social media as soon as it happened. She said, when I first saw it, she's like, at first I couldn't believe it. And so when she told me this a couple of days ago, I said to her, are you saying you couldn't believe it as in it was just so surreal that you couldn't process that the president had perhaps just been shot? Or are you saying that it was as if like your subconscious was rejecting it, like what you're looking at is not real? And she said, yeah, that one. So what she meant was, it was almost as if she was looking at something that wasn't real. It was like a movie. It was like it was fake. It was like she couldn't believe that it was real. But so she was admitting this to me. So what she was saying is, she's like, I'm not sure that it was fake. I'm putting some words in her mouth, but basically what she was saying is, she's like, hey, I'm not where you are. I'm not ready to call it staged. But what I will tell you is, when I first watched it, I could not accept it as real. And I'm not just meaning that it was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that happened. This is so crazy. No, as in like part of my mind was rejecting this. That's kind of what she was telling me. Well, I thought that was very interesting.
Very, very interesting. And I actually understand it. I understand why she and millions of other people are struggling with this. Because look, it goes back to, again, trying to accept that your government tried to kill you. It's so painful a realization. You'd rather accept the comfort of the lie than the painful reality. So what I mean by that is, if I imagine I came up to you and showed you some video footage and it showed that your dad's a pedophile, or that your dad killed someone, or that your dad is not who you thought he was. He's not actually even your dad. He's someone else. Your dad isn't your dad.
Mm-hmm.
Your initial reaction would be like, no, this isn't true. Like, no, it's not.
Mm-hmm.
Your eyes would continue to say, no, I reject what you're telling me, because it's too painful, because your whole world reality would shatter. And for people who are invested in Trump, who think he's fighting the deep state, he's against the evil ones, they think they are awake. They've rejected the vaccines. They reject the tyranny. They know about Agenda 2030. They reject the climate scam. They reject the Ukraine war. They whatever. They think they're awake to all the nonsense, and they think, Trump is on my side and he's going to beat the evil ones. The idea that actually he's serving the evil ones, in fact, he's on their camp, is so painful a realization that people just reject it and go, no, that was a real assassination attempt.
Absolutely. Yeah. And this goes back to what I was saying before about how there's that human tendency. We all fall for it sometimes, which is sometimes you just resort back to following the path of least resistance, because the other path, there's too much resistance. You can't go there. And so there's this fundamental idea of whatever you want to call it, critical reasoning, critical thinking, whatever. But you have to learn to challenge your own assumptions. And that is easily said, but very difficult to perform because it can be very painful. And, sometimes you think, especially if you're 40 or 45 or 50 or older, you think to yourself, yeah, but there are beliefs that I've held for decades of my adult life. They've got me where they are, like how do I shed some of that and get rid of that? Because it's very hard to break free from some of that. And I'll tell you this. So I've become more and more convinced that because I do believe that a lot of what we see that happens on kind of the worldwide spectrum, a lot of what we refer to as geopolitics, a lot of that is really just a function of both sides kind of being controlled. In any case, so I think many times there are wars that are orchestrated, and then they just kind of fabricate some incident to make it look like it was organic. But here's the thing about war is war often provides this convenient backdrop for a certain proof of concept to be for a certain concept to be proved, so it then can be used more broadly to include on domestic populations. I'll give you an example. So in Vietnam, there was this program that was run that was called the Phoenix Program, and the Phoenix Program was basically the idea behind it ostensibly was you're going to break the back of the Viet Cong by targeting certain individuals that are either members of the Viet Cong or part of the overall support apparatus of the Viet Cong. And, the Viet Cong was already very different than the North Vietnamese army because it was basically a guerrilla. It was this guerrilla force that was in the South, right? So it was already kind of different than the uniformed North Vietnamese army. So more hidden, could blend in more easily, which made it very, very dangerous. So how do you target that? And so the idea was, well, we're going to neutralize it by going after specific individuals. But there was this entire psychological component of the Phoenix Program. And anybody who's ever studied on this, there's a great book on it by Douglas Valentine. But it was pretty sick stuff that was done to strike fear into the hearts of anybody who might be affiliated in any way whatsoever with the Viet Cong, either by being a member or by, supporting it or living in a certain village that could somehow be tied to it. Anyway.
No, in what sense? What sick stuff?
Like, supposedly there are these legends amongst the indigenous individuals that there are basically vampires in the jungles or vampiric creatures in the jungles. And so a lot of times, like U.S. soldiers that were participating in these operations, if they found a Viet Cong member, they would drain the blood and then leave the body where it would be found, so that individuals would believe that that individual had been attacked by one of these, vampiric creatures. Like things like that are being done very deliberately to create an outsized psychological effect, going so far as to completely drain a body of blood. So anyway, but when you take some of that, you take some of what is learned there, the concept that is proofed there, and then you think, how can we take those same psychological components and then use them more broadly, right? So instead of using them in an acute, targeted individual sense against this individual or this small cell, how do we do it on an entire society, domestically, against our own people? And the Phoenix program is just one example, but I think a lot of what we have seen over the last couple of decades is, how do you take any of these psychological programs to include more acute mind control programs, such as MK Ultra, that everyone has heard about now, and it's kind of used as an umbrella term to include a bunch of different sub programs that had slightly different purposes behind them. And, of course, they would test these on individuals in a very acute sense. But I do think that a lot of that research was done to figure out, are there ways in which we can replicate this on a society at large? And I think that to some degree describes what we saw during the entire COVID operation, was the application of this type of pretty sick research and then its methods applied more broadly.
Right. Listen, you talked about Trump. I agree, by the way. You talked about Trump doing some bad stuff. What's he doing bad? What's he doing wrong? And you never answer the question, is he doing any good stuff? Because like I said, people are saying he's doing great stuff. So is he? Is he doing great stuff? And what's the bad stuff?
Yeah. Is he doing? I think the question of, is he doing good stuff, is tricky because, one, I think that there are things that he does that maybe can be sold as being good, but even they may actually have an ulterior motive that a lot of the people just haven't necessarily accepted yet. And I'll give you one example. There are a lot of people that are fans of his stance on tariffs. So even if you separate Trump from that issue, you're already going to have people who have very different views on just their idea in general on tariffs, just in the abstract, totally separated from Trump. But if for whatever reason, if you tend to support that idea or you support Trump, then you may find a way to tell yourself that, oh, this is a good idea. Now, here's another example that a lot of people kind of in my circles have latched onto. So the DEI issue, okay? So if we go back to the military, I would say over the last couple of years has had three huge issues. Number one is by far the whole COVID shot mandate, that whole issue, which is much larger than the other two. But you also had the botched Afghanistan withdrawal, which caught a ton of heat from people within, from a lot of the American public, et cetera. That happened in August of 2021, incidentally, about the same time that the COVID shot mandate went into effect. The third of these kind of big problems that the military has had the last couple of years is DEI. Now, here's my stance on DEI. So yes, I think DEI is ridiculous. Yes, I think it has no place in the military. Yes, I think it needs to be rooted out. But I also think that it is low-hanging fruit compared to things like, the COVID operation. There's almost no comparison. So when Trump comes in and he rails against DEI, or Pete Hegseth comes in as the Secretary of Defense and starts, kicking out members of the trans community that are in the ranks, you get a lot of people who start to clap and cheer, and they say, "Oh, these guys are coming in and they're gonna strengthen our military." And in my mind, I'm like, yeah, but those are like, I'm with you, but that is such low hanging fruit. And for all I know, that stuff was done deliberately, because I do believe that these people are very sophisticated when they plan these operations. So that could have been done deliberately to then give them something that they could very easily undo. And then, the people would cheer. If we take that one step further. So back to Butler, Pennsylvania, you said, hey, they've got this one woman there who, doesn't know how to put her pistol in her holster. She's too short to be around the president. She doesn't know what she's doing. And for all we know, and I think this is quite likely, of course, you said, I mean, she looked like she was acting. Well, that could have been done deliberately to then give them an easy out where they can then blame the failure of the Secret Service agents on, DEI, because a lot of people will buy off on it and they'll say, look, Trump is getting rid of all of this nonsense that never should have been in our military to begin with. And I agree. So is that a good thing that he's doing? Yes, but it's also like it's low hanging fruit that, for all we know, could have been planned to be low hanging fruit.
I agree, and I think they are very sophisticated. And the more I look into it, there's just so many strands of this, Brad. The way they've infiltrated it, and what I've realized is it's all running on the model of like the Roman Empire and the East India Company. So what do I mean by that? So let's take the Roman Empire, for example. The Roman Empire torched places and destroyed communities and villages. Look at Gaul. It had, this Celtic population. They're the indigenous people of Europe with indigenous religion and culture and language. And there's about 5 million. And Gaul is like modern day France, bit of Belgium. Yep. And there's like 5-6 million Gauls there. And then the Roman army came along. And then after their, campaign, there's like literally 1.5 million left. I mean, they just decimated that place. But what did they do? The Roman army took the troops of the people they defeated and then transplanted them to other places. So, for example, on Hadrian's Wall, which is the border between like England and Scotland, the northernmost part of the Roman Empire, there were garrisons with Syrian archers, with Gauls from Belgium, from cavalry from Spain. So what you would do is you would defeat the local population, but then you would convert them to mercenaries. You would convert them, and then or soldiers, and then you don't want these young men hanging around in their communities. You transplant them to another place where it's not their culture, it's not their villages, and then you tell them to keep them under control. And the Roman army did that, and guess what? The British Empire did that. And a classic example is the English. The English, with Cromwell in particular, with funding from, Jews from Spain and the Netherlands, funded this mercenary force to overcome the royalists and, ended up killing Charles I, who was, I think, a Scottish king. And then they took over and fought against the Scots at the Battle of Culloden, totally decimated Scottish culture. Gaelic was outlawed and banned. Men were massacred. And then they took those Scots, the mercenaries, the fighters, made them into mercenaries. They were shipped off to, conquer India and whatnot. And the same, they conquered Ireland. If you really want to look at the original places the British Empire conquered, Scotland and Ireland. And then Cromwell went and sold off like hundreds of thousands of Irish to go as indentured slaves to North America. Like the first slaves in North America were white, by the way. Right. And that British Empire, it was very similar. It was modeled on the Roman Empire. You conquer these people and then you use those people to then subjugate other people. Then they conquered India like that. They would get one group of Indians, like say in East India, and then move them to West India with different language, different religion, to conquer and subjugate them. And that's what they did all around the world. And the East India Company fundamentally was what was bankrolling the empire. It was people think decisions are made in the cabinet offices and government halls and whatnot. My honest opinion now is all these decisions are made in the boardroom by bankers and the businessmen and the merchant class. They make the decisions. And now that modern era is, BlackRock, State Street.
Sure.
And who's behind it? Like the Rothschilds and other banking merchant families and God knows who else. And they dictate. So, for example, BlackRock has trillions under its control. There's a reason why, someone like Keir Starmer comes to power and or Rishi Sunak, and Larry Fink, head of BlackRock, is in there meeting them first before anyone else. It's like, why does he get a private audience with my prime minister? Like, why?
Yeah.
I don't get a private audience with my prime minister. Why is this guy? What's being discussed? What deals are being made? And that's the reality that we face right now. So we've got this situation where this ruling system and this governance system is very complicated. It's multi-layered, but ultimately I think it's from a banking merchant class, and they use empires like they come and go, like they're different versions. It'll be Venetian Empire. It'll be the Dutch Empire. Then it'll be the English British Empire. Then it'll be the American Empire. But they toss them. They like sap them of all the blood like parasites. Use their men. Use their resources of that country. And then when they think, right, we've pushed it as far as we can, they do this controlled demolition and move on and prop up another empire. It's quite a clever system, and it seems to work. And one of the systems they're using now is not only have they used the financial system and their false economics, which economics is such a bullshit discipline because it never ever factors in money production. It never talks about how banks make money out of nothing. They talk about as if all of economics is about interest rates and inflation, and it's about pesky consumers not saving enough and spending too much, or reckless loans, and but they never talk about where the banks create money out of nothing, and the central bankers can inflate the money supply and then contract it, deliberately, and buy up then the cheap assets, and they have all the power and they have the foresight, and they play with us, and they're the root of all the financial evil, but then they blame us, little public. And then, you know what? We have to go through austerity measures, and we need to be taxed, and because our fault, because we weren't saving enough and we were reckless. So they use this fake economic system. They use taxation. They use the education system to dumb us down. They use the healthcare system to make us sick and dumb. They use the idea of democracy to give us this illusion of freedom and choice and hope that, you know what, I'd get it this time, vote better next time. When the game is rigged and there is no such thing as democracy, and it's just bullshit. And they use governance systems like you have to be registered or licensed. So if you're a lawyer, you have to be with the bar. If you're a doctor, you need your license. If you're even a roofer, you need association. If you're an accountant, you need to be in with this. You need to be a chartered accountant, whatever it is. And if you step out of line, well, your registration licensing system authority can say, well, you're bringing us into disrepute. We're withdrawing your license. Now suddenly you can't practice anymore. Now, so they use regulations to really capture you. There's another regulations, the international standards. So that's not a government organization. It's not accountable to anybody. But governments use this, say, oh, well, it has to be through a, properly registered and standard. And that's all, they're not accountable to anybody. And because, and these people who are behind it, they can give the standard to whoever they want and whoever they don't want. And it goes on and on and on. There's all these supranational globalist registrations, regulations, regulatory authorities, legislation, laws that are all designed to create a matrix where you and I are fucked on a daily basis. But the people above, right at the top, they have complete immunity. They can travel wherever they want. No one stops them at the airport. They have a private jet. They take off at a private airfield. They land in a country. No one is checking them. No one is asking them to take off their shoes, take off their belt. There's none of that bullshit. They come and go as they please. They can take as much money as they want. They can buy whatever they want. They can have a private audience with a politician and tell them what legislation to pass and everything. It's a different class and system, and it's really not fair. It's not fair. The system is pure evil, but it just keeps working because of that little parasite that I talked about from Star Trek. Like, people like you and me, not you and me, but people like us are working for them. They drive their cars, they fly their planes, they cook their meals, they write up the op-eds for them, they run around as politicians, play acting for them, taking their money. And, like people like Netanyahu, I don't even think he's the top guy. I think he's another actor doing as he's told, playing the script. Like, it's ultimately people like us that are enabling those people at the top, which is what's so frustrating.
Yeah.
Sorry for that rant, by the way.
No, that was great. Because actually, I do have a question for you about that. So when you mentioned the Roman Empire, and there are people who think that the Roman Empire is still very much alive today and just kind of exists in different forms. Now, what's interesting about that is, and I think a lot of Americans don't even necessarily realize this, but so the city of Washington, D.C. was kind of conceptualized to be a type of Rome, or Rome on the Potomac, the Potomac River being right there. And if you look at the architecture of the city, it's on the one hand, it's kind of considered to be very Roman, but there also are a lot of there's a lot of Freemasonic architecture. The layout, like the design of the city, is also heavily Freemasonic, but also our term for Capitol is in Capitol Hill. Its structure with the dome, like that is deliberately patterned after, Roman architecture. Our word, the Senate, senator. I mean, we borrowed those from Rome. That was done very, very deliberately, And, but the other thing that I wanted to kind of ask you was, in the UK, what is the thought, kind of similar to what I was saying about DC, but what is the thought there behind kind of what is stated as the government, and then also maybe the ideas around like the city of London, specifically the city?
Well, I don't know what I don't know what other people think, but it's clear the city of London isn't part of the UK.
Right.
I mean, the monarch can't just walk in there. He needs permission. And it's again goes back to Cromwell. So I think around the 1200s, the Jews were expelled from England. The ones that came in with William the Conqueror in 1066. And they were up to no good. They were up to some shenanigans. I think they were clipping coins or something like that. And they were expelled. And I can't remember which king, but there was one king. So for about 300-400 years, there have been no Jews now. And there were Marano Jews. So out of Spain, when Aragon and whatever his name, I can't remember Catherine and Aragon, and whatever, Catherine of Aragon and someone, and whatever, Ferdinand or whatever, married, and they conquered the Moors and kicked them out. They were the remaining Muslims and Jews were told, you need to convert and become Catholic, otherwise leave. And the Jews, Spanish Jews that stayed, who I think they're called Moranos, that pretended to be Catholic, but they weren't. So you had some Spanish Morano merchants go to London who openly were saying they're Catholic, but were actually Jewish. And they're in England, at that time was like, you're not allowed Jews in here. But when the Jews, particularly from the Netherlands, who had arrived from Spain, funded Cromwell, it was on the condition that Cromwell, gets rid of Charles. And there's some secret papers that were released, I think, when Napoleon found it in some synagogue or something, that showed that there were merchant bankers in Europe who were telling Cromwell, state that Charles is treasonous and this is how you're going to overthrow him and whatnot. And then once you do, you're going to let us back in. And that's what happened. So then in the 1600s, the Jewish merchants came back into London and they created their synagogue, and they also had Freemason lodges. Now, some people say that these Freemasonic lodges, Freemasonry was an occult kind of system that was preserving knowledge like masonry and whatnot. And, the art of whatever craft it is that you did, building structures and whatnot. And it was captured. It was captured by the Illuminati. It was captured by some of these Zionist people. And their agenda way back then was that they were going to use London and make it into an empire, and then in return they would get, this homeland and whatnot. So, that's when it all started, and the City of London really has run the world, I think, since then. The East India Company, and that kind of morphed. And where did that disappear to? And who were the shareholders? And I think the Queen's involved, and the royal family's involved, and all that. I mean, the King now. I think they're all part of it. And ultimately, these people, they wear the flag of the country, but I don't think they really are loyal to that country. I think they're loyal to themselves, and that's really it, to be honest. Even though they pretend to be loyal, the way Trump drapes himself in the American flag, I don't really think he cares that much about America. I think he will say all the right things, but he doesn't actually mean it. Like, he's in it for himself and his paymasters, and that's the sad reality. And I think that's where we are right now. We are a corporation. America is a corporation. We are incorporated, and it's the bankers. It's the bankers that own us and run us. I think that's where we are.
So, there are a lot of similarities between, especially when you talk about this corporate aspect, between the City of London and then also DC.
Oh,
because
can I
there
just
are plenty
quickly?
of people who say that.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Very quickly, I forgot anything. You mentioned Freemasonry, so I think that is a tool now used, and I think most people at the lower levels have no inclination, no idea at all how nefarious it is. They are ultimately weak-willed men and men of low integrity who feel that by joining this, association, this fraternity, this secret society, that you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. I'll wear this funny apron and do these funny little rituals for you, but it's all a bit of a giggle and a laugh. If it means I do well in my job and I get more work and contracts, great. And superficially for society, they give this idea and notion that, it's just charitable work and good work. What's secret? Why is it secret? Why does it have to be secret? Nothing good comes out of secret associations and societies. So I think the Freemasonry, and the thing is, you only go up the level depending on how corruptible you are. So they'll gauge and suss you out, like if you are, if you're a man of really low integrity and morals, you'll climb up. If you're a self-serving narcissist and psychopath, you'll climb to the top. And I think the system is designed to identify that. It's designed to identify the narcissists, the sociopaths and psychopaths and reward them, because it'll also make sure that you're captured, compromised and complicit and follow orders. So you will be rewarded, but it'll come at a cost. It's like literally selling your soul to the devil. So most people in the lower ranks are probably totally oblivious to this, but the people right at the top are serving ultimately a very Kabbalist, satanic kind of organization, subversive, and it's used as one tool, one of many, to control society at a higher level. But there, in the modern day parlance, there's many of these. You've got the Club of Rome, you've got the Bilderberg Group, you've got Davos, WEF, Council for Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission. I think one of the big ones is the Institute for International Studies or something like that. It's a British one. The Royal Institute for International Studies. And, and Chatham House, like these, the people at the top use all these networks of organizations to create policies and decisions, and they use politicians then to carry them out, these orders. And, there's layers to it all. And the money system is a big factor of buying people off, basically, and getting what they want. I think that's what it's about.
I agree with all that. So, so the RIIA, I was actually about to mention that too, because this is kind of interesting too, because like so what I think a lot of Americans don't understand, because I tend to agree with you that I think the world is largely run, out of the City of London, which is interesting if you're an American, because I do believe that I do believe that the American government this is where it gets tricky, because it's not so much that the American government is subordinate to the British government, because I do believe what you're saying, and I completely agree, is that what we think of as the British government is not the City of London,
Yeah.
But anyway, but the CFR, the Council on Foreign Relations, is a group that is kind of considered to be a sister organization to the Royal Institute of International Affairs, that RIIA that you mentioned.
Yeah.
But in truth, it is subordinate to the RIIA. And so the CFR kind of takes its marching orders from the RIIA, and then the CFR, which collectively is just considered to be kind of this think tank. But in reality, that is this organization that is really a steering committee for much of the U.S. government. It's not just a think tank. It's a steering committee that has a lot of influence, but it in turn is being steered, by the RIIA. And my understanding is that there are other organizations that kind of hide under the name of a think tank that are in other capitals of the powerful countries in the world, to include even those that we would consider to be Western adversaries, like China, Russia, etc. And that even they may be receiving kind of their instructions, out of the City of London.
Yeah, what I haven't factored in is where Israel plays. I don't know whether they are just a proxy and being used just like the Americans to cause havoc, and then ultimately it's all coming from London, or whether they are the same group of people. I just don't know yet. I don't know.
Yeah, here's what I tend to think, and I'm not saying that this is definitively the way that it is, but kind of my opinion on that right now is I do think that they are steered through the City of London as well. So one thing that I kind of, because a lot of Americans right now, they think, America is controlled and run by Israel. And I think that is kind of being used as a deliberate smokescreen. I think it's maybe more accurate, but again, this is somewhat conjecture on my part, but I think it's more accurate to say that no, that's not necessarily the case, but they do want you to believe that. They want you to believe that America is being controlled by Israel, but in reality, the United States and Israel are both being run by someone else, but they're playing different roles. And that when Israel is being used as a smokescreen, it's kind of being done in a way to hide some of the players that are behind Israel and pulling those strings as well. I also don't know exactly
I agree.
what they have.
I agree, by the way.
Because here's where it gets tricky, because I don't know exactly what they have planned for Israel. Because here's the thing. A couple of years ago, you could not criticize Israel. And now there's a lot of criticism of Israel all over the place. And much of it, I believe, is warranted. Like, criticism of the Israeli government, criticism of Netanyahu. But my point is that you used to not find that stuff, and so now it's as if it's permissible to criticize Israel. And so I think just in some ways that enables the dialectic, kind of the pro-Israel and the anti-Israel. And you need those in order to have an effective dialectic. You need the weight of those ideas to have some rough parity. Otherwise, the dialectic doesn't really work. But it also makes me wonder what do they have in store for Israel? Because there are plenty of people who think that 12-day war that we saw between Iran and Israel, that was just act one of the play, and that it's not over. And in fact, I've even heard some people theorize that they think that September, which is now, may be when that kind of kicks off again, because Israel may have needed some time to basically replenish its arsenals. And what that probably means is get more of its replenishment from, the United States, et cetera.
But hold on one thought. Can I go and get some water? And then
of course.
Right, I'm going to pause and get some water.
All right, cool.
And now I've got some questions.
Hi, me again. You're listening to the Doc Malik podcast. This show is 100% independent and fully funded by listeners like yourself. So if you wish to support Ahmed in all that he is doing, then please subscribe to his channel on Spotify or on his Substack, or simply buy him a coffee with one of the donation links, which can be found at docmalik.com. Now, let's get back to the show.
So, remind me, what were we talking about? I've forgotten now. God, I'm awful.
Yeah, so we were just talking about So there are some people who believe that what we saw during the 12-day war may have been just the first act of something that may be longer, more enduring. And some people have said, hey, that may kick off again in September. And the reason they were saying September is because Israel might need some time to replenish its stockpiles. And it might be the United States that's largely assisting in that.
Yeah, before we talk about that, I want to say, something really weird. I was listening to Dave Smith on Joe Rogan. I quite like Dave Smith. Do you know who he is?
Yeah.
He's a comedian. He's quite funny. He's an American Jew. He's very critical of Zionism and Israel. And I love what he comes out with. I love his take on things. But it was just a bit disappointing in the sense that both Joe and Dave skirted around 9/11 and kind of like don't challenge the official narrative. Like, I think you and I, the reason why I'm talking about 9/11 is because the anniversary is next week, literally next week.
Yep.
And I think it was, for me, one of the pivotal moments in my life. I remember what I was doing there and then. I was in Stanmore Royal National Orthopedic Hospital, sitting down, operating on a foot with a surgeon called Mr. Dishan Singh. And, it was just like, it was unbelievable. I've got family in New York. I'd been to New York. I had been to the Twin Towers that year, believe it or not. I'd been up there. And suddenly you're seeing this. And it was like, at the time I was a Muslim. I was like, oh my God, my team has really fucked up and let us down. It's just like, it was pivotal. But, it was a false flag. It was a terrorist act by the government and the agencies behind it. And basically it's just horrific. So I was a bit disappointed when Dave Smith and Joe Rogan were not really hammering that home. They kind of skirted around it. What do you think about 9/11?
Well, I first of all, I totally agree that it's a false flag. Here's what else I would say. So for me, kind of like you mentioned, it really hit home for me because in some ways, actually quite literally, as in like geographically, because I was not that far away from New York City when it happened, because I was in my third year at West Point. So I'm studying and training to become a military officer. And what just happened on that day is going to impact my entire military career, because what we saw happen that day would set the frame for what would become the global war on terror, right? So of course, in that way it hit home, but also just geographically in that West Point is right up the Hudson River from New York City. It's only about 50 miles away from New York City. So this, in some ways, was happening in my backyard, right? Now, of course, I was as hoodwinked as anybody else. I of course believed the story that we were told, and in fact, a couple of years later, I would find myself in Afghanistan on my first deployment, and I truly believed every day of the year that I was there. I believed that I was there, fighting terrorists for God and country. I mean, that's what I believed, And then I came home still believing that. I believed that for the whole year that I was there. I came home, and then almost by coincidences that have nothing to do with my own military service, did I start to come into contact with some information that would lead me to, challenge those ideas. So my entire military career is bookended on the one side by 9/11 and on the other side by COVID. And what I've come to accept is I do think that 9/11 was something that was done as a preparatory step for the COVID operation. And if you look at and you may be able to provide a broader perspective on this than even me, but like, yes, it was an attack that happened in New York City and in DC, because if you remember, the narrative is that, the Pentagon was also attacked that day. Of course, the United States felt that it had been attacked, but I would say that much of, the free world also felt that it had been attacked that day, right? And I think that when you see the response, when you see the way, remember some of the rhetoric that came out of President Bush at the time, you're either with us or you're with the terrorists, like some of that, like that very clear dichotomous framing, the coalition of the willing. Like if you think about those terms and you think back on that and you're like, how did we fall for that? Or just what happened in airports, or giving up your liberty for security, and how just everybody went along with it because we all believed that this attack had taken place. And then there was the Patriot Act. So first of all, there's the quite Orwellian nature of the name, the Patriot Act. But then also, I can't remember what the size of the Patriot Act is, just in sheer
thousands,
volume, like
thousands of pages, thousands.
Yeah, but it just pops up.
Yeah, here you go.
Right. Yeah. I mean, just clearly had already been written. Right. But we just accept it, and then we just go to war. We just go to war for 20 years, right? And not just in Afghanistan, but the next thing you know, 18 months later, well, here we are in Iraq. Here we are in Syria. Here we are in Yemen, and anywhere else that we can kind of
Libya,
put under some broad umbrella. Libya, yeah, absolutely. So
Somalia, Yemen, everywhere.
Yeah. And then you look at, so here's the thing, and I say this now. So here's where we never got to. We never got to some sort of reckoning with 9/11 where you had some acknowledgement that, hey, we were lied to. Those who we were told were the perpetrators were not. It was much, much bigger, and our own government had a role in it, right? So we've never gotten to that point. And so you're almost like the historical edifice that is your country or whatever is built to some degree on a foundation of lies, Now, and that's happened many times over history, but even if we just look at just the last 25 years with 9/11, and then here comes COVID. So what I tell people sometimes I say, if we don't force some sort of reckoning about what happened with COVID, in other words, if we do what we did after 9/11, which was nothing, we just moved forward and we accepted this false narrative as the defining narrative that was going to define the trajectory of the next decades of our country's history. If you go back to JFK, what happened when JFK was killed? Well, there was a fake commission, the Warren Commission. What were the conclusions? Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. But if you ask Americans now, and I don't know what the figures are, but if you were to ask Americans now, do you believe that Lee Harvey Oswald killed JFK and acted alone? I have to assume that the overwhelming majority would say no. So the thing is that you individually, everyone rejects the narrative, but somehow collectively, we still promote that narrative. You see, like it's very weird. And so you look at JFK.
Very weird.
Yeah, you look at JFK and you say we there was never that true reckoning where we demanded answers for what happened. And then, 4 decades later, 9/11 happens. Same thing. There's no reckoning where we demand the truth and some sort of accountability. And then 2 additional decades later, we get to COVID. And the worst thing that we can do is either not demand some sort of reckoning or allow another, fake commission like the Warren Commission or like the 9/11 Commission to just come together and say, we've investigated ourselves, we have found no wrongdoing, and oh, by the way, here's what happened with COVID,
Yeah, really, really good point, mate. So let's now move on to Iran. So the Ayatollah was a CIA UK asset. He was harboring in the West, France, America, God knows where else. And I think they deliberately wanted to bring down the Shah, even though the Shah was a proxy of the US and the UK.
Yep.
The whole point was the UK wanted the Shah in so that they could get their oil back, under British Petroleum, because Mossadegh had nationalized everything. And I think the Brits and the Americans are very good at propping people up, using them, and then getting rid of them because they know that the people are getting fed up. So they will prop up the leader and then do a controlled demolition and then provide another leader. So even though they provided the Shah and propped him up, the Shah, like a lot of people, then, start to get too big for their own boots, start to do things that are in their own interest. The Shah wanted to get nuclear reactors for Iran. And I was like, no, you're not allowed to do this. You're getting ahead of yourself. Mm-hmm. Who do you think you are? Have you forgotten? We're the guys that put you here. So either the leaders are just going off-piste, off the reservation, or literally their masters are like, yeah, you know what, you've had your time now. Whatever. They get rid of them. So they get rid of the Shah and they wanted the Ayatollah to take over. And the question is, did the Ayatollah then do a double take and screw them back? Or, is Iran still this proxy agent of, whoever is ruling the world? I'm not talking about America, Britain, whatever, but the real shadow. Or is it a genuine outcast opposition? They don't have a central bank, which is in the BIS system. They seem to be a target. It's very difficult to make out. And was this war a genuine war? I mean, they did bomb. What's interesting is Iran bombed strategic, military assets, airports, institutes, the intelligence institutes and stuff like that. Things that were military targets. And obviously Israel doesn't want to talk about that and doesn't show pictures of that. Yeah. And if you look at the number of casualties on Israel's side, it was 50s or 60 or 70. But Israel didn't have any problem bombing civilians and stuff. And there's something like 2,000-3,000 people in Iran died. And I think it's not about the fact that Israel has got superior weapons. I mean, we saw the Iranian missiles are pretty damn impressive. It's the fact that, Israel didn't hesitate to bomb, for example, news stations and stuff like that. But the thing is Iran just an actor? Are they just being controlled, or is there something seriously genuine going on here, like an act of resistance? What's happening?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I wrestle with this exact same question. I will tell you my assumption right now, but I'm not clearly this is an assumption. So I tend to think that they are also controlled and that they're not a true foil to kind of the actual power structure. But that doesn't mean that I don't necessarily have questions, or that I sometimes I ask those exact same questions that you do. But I will say this. What was interesting about that whole 12-day war is that Israel starts it. Now, of course, I realize that this conflict has been going on forever, but at least in terms of this episode, Israel starts it. Iran responds. Then you kind of have like a tit for tat. But then it's Israel that says, hey, ceasefire, But before that, we have the United States get involved. And this is what I thought was incredible. When I say get involved, I don't mean through some sort of intelligence sharing or even through providing weapons or providing training. No, we actually had, according to what we've been told, we had pilots flying over Iranian airspace and dropping bombs, which is something that most people would have thought would not occur anytime soon, or that if it did occur, it would mean that, oh, here we go. Now,
really? Yeah. American pilots were dropping bombs?
Yeah,
with American planes?
Bombing raid. Yeah, the bombing raid that occurred on the 3 nuclear sites in Iran.
That wasn't Israel?
No, those were Americans.
Oh my God. And Trump sanctioned this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because then in the United States there was a lot of there was a huge one, there was outrage, but two, by some people, when I say there was outrage, I mean a lot of Americans were all for it, but some were not. Some were like, oh, now you've gotten us completely involved. But anyway, but also there were a lot of questions as to, well, how effective were these supposed bombings? Because there were the 3 nuclear sites, and then there were these arguments back and forth on were they completely destroyed? Because that was the initial narrative, was that those 3 sites had been catastrophically and irreparably damaged. And then there were obviously counter arguments that came out that said, no, a lot of the actual material and the equipment had been moved out, whatever. And then, of course, there was then this retaliatory strike that in which the Iranians appeared to have basically let the U.S. base know. I believe it was in Qatar, if I remember correctly.
Doha.
Anyway,
Doha.
but they basically let them know, and then they evacuated the soldiers, and then a strike occurred. And then the next thing you know, we're in a ceasefire. So I don't know. I guess it's anyone's guess as to what's going to happen next.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't even make sense. I mean, part of me is like, did the Americans take over because they're like, oh, what has Israel got us into? They almost warned the Israelis that they're going to be bombing, and then they bombed basically the side of a mountain. Nothing really happened. And, that was to save face and to de-escalate. Mm-hmm. And then Iran, to save face, went, yeah, well, we're going to bomb you back. But we're warning you that we're going to bomb you and give you plenty of time to, get your guys out. I was just like, what is this fake war? It's like people are pulling their punches. It was like, yeah. That's what I mean. It's like a show. It's like, what the fuck is going on here?
Well, so this is where it gets interesting because I do believe that I think these are questions we have to ask. And because I do believe that there is this phenomenon that is real that some people call atrocity propaganda. And I think that's a real phenomenon. So basically what that would be, if people are unfamiliar with the term, is you can, on the one hand, you could either through whatever, deep fakes or whatever, or AI, you could create the appearance that some sort of atrocity occurred that never occurred at all. Or you could have something that is rather small in scale that occurs, and then you can basically amplify it and make it look as if that atrocity was much, 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 much larger. And so I think that's a real phenomenon. And I think that from here forward, as it becomes harder to tell with a video what's real, what's not real, or what's in some way what has been enhanced, I think that this is going to be something that we're going to have to try and figure out how to negotiate whenever we see even something like a war. Because are we entering territory like the whole, the wag the dog scenario from that movie, where are we in a situation where you could theatrically present an entire war that is totally fake, like none of it is occurring at all?
Yeah.
I think we're kind of entering territory where something like that could happen.
Wow. But there's also, there is real opposition. Like the Yemen prime minister just got assassinated,
Mm-hmm.
and other senior leaders in the party, an Israeli jet bombed them. I don't understand how the Israeli intelligence is so good. Like, how to know where these people are. Like, they're really on it. And then, and the way they assassinate the Iranian top nuclear scientists and generals and whatnot. But then Iran never retaliates. I never get that. And I don't know whether the leadership is like a fake, phony leadership that holds back the people. Like, it seems like Israel and America can do whatever they like with impunity. Can you imagine Iran killed like a Western country's prime minister? Like, can you imagine the indignation right now? Like, Iran bombed Italy and killed the Italian prime minister, or let's just say Greece, the Greek prime minister, right? Iran killed the Greek prime minister, right? Everybody would be up in arms, like this rogue fucking state, this terrorist state, this international pariah. We need sanctions. We need a coalition of the willing. We need to destroy this next Hitler. Can you just imagine? And it's like, it's just another piece of news. Israel bombed and killed a prime minister. But you know what? He's a sand person. Fuck the sand people. He's a Muslim. He's it's smelly, like itchy camel rider. He can die. It doesn't really matter.
It's what Trump did during a couple years ago during his first term. Remember that?
When he bombed Syria.
Yeah. Well, no, I'm talking about with the Iranian leader that was assassinated.
Yeah.
I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but
I know.
One of the top military leaders. A couple years ago, I can't remember exactly what year it was, but it was during the first term. But one of the things also that I thought was, I actually remember when, I guess it was about a year ago now. Soleimani.
That's it.
What year was that? Was that, I want to say 2017.
2020. January 2020.
Okay. All right. So a little bit later than I thought. But that's who I was thinking of, Soleimani. So about a year ago, maybe not quite a year ago, but there was this, there was the operation where a lot of top guys all had their cell phones blow up all at exactly the same time. Remember that?
The pagers.
The pagers.
Dude,
so on the one,
10 years in the making. 10 years in the making.
Yeah. So to me, that is kind of a Phoenix program type operation, because on the one hand, if I look through just the military lens, I am amazed at what it would take coordination wise and intelligence wise to make an operation like that happen, and the sheer impact that it has. So, I can respect it. I can appreciate it, just looking at it through that lens. But I also think that when you do something like that, I was talking before about the Phoenix program with the Viet Cong. It's kind of like that. Like, it is meant to be done to have an enormous psychological impact, because all of us are carrying, whether it's a pager or a cell phone or whatever, that's like almost has become an appendage of our body now.
How do I know this isn't a bomb?
That's right. And I think that's intentional, so that everyone, regardless of what side you're on, where you live or wherever, everyone now knows that if someone wanted to blow your cell phone up while you've got it next to your head talking on it, they could.
And again, they did this totally unethical, immoral, by the most moral army in the world, by the way, act where people in public spaces, people, innocents, civilians were maimed and killed, children, women, men, blinded, killed, just horrific. Thousands of these things going off. And instead of going, this is disgusting, this is a mass terrorist act by a rogue state, we need to rein in Israel. Like, what are they doing? What is going on here? It was like they go on news and they get congratulated, and it's like, oh, how amazing you are, and how did you guys go about it? Oh my God, congratulations, well done, you're just fantastic. Like, the world is just messed up, mate. Seriously messed up. I mean, I just flipped the switch. Like, just imagine Iran tomorrow makes 10,000 mobile phones in Israel go off. You got little screaming babies and children and women, supermarkets. What would the world think?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
But Israel can do it, and it's all right. It's like nothing to see. Move along.
So there's another thing here too, where like, there's an aspect that I talk a lot about, which is moral injury. So moral injury is the phenomenon that occurs. There's a couple different ways it can occur, but it occurs when either you as an individual, you engage in behavior that goes against your own moral code. Well, we've all done that. We know what it feels like to feel guilty for something you did, right? But another way in which it can manifest itself is, let's say, you witness some sort of atrocity. So it wasn't you that committed the act, but you witnessed something that grossly goes against what you believe. Or, and I've talked about this with our own military, you're part of an organization and you watch the organization or the leaders of the organization operate in ways that are directly oppositional to everything that the organization purportedly stands for. Well, that disconnect that you start to feel is moral injury. It has a name. And so moral injury can manifest itself as guilt, where if you're part of it, you say, I did this, it was wrong, I feel guilty because I did that. You can go one step further and you can feel shame, which is, it's not just that I feel guilty for what I did, it's that, I'm a bad person because of this. Or you can start to feel disgusted towards yourself or disgusted towards other individuals. So I think right now, many individuals in our countries are starting to wrestle with moral injury, because people are starting to realize, even if it's still on a subconscious level, that perhaps unintentionally they have been supporting a lot of these people or groups that have been engaged in some of these activities. So you bring up with Israel specifically. So what if you're someone in the West who, and we've talked before previously about just Zionism and some of these misguided religious beliefs around Zionism. And I say that as a Christian, but I'm certainly not a Zionist. And in fact, I believe that the two are incompatible. But there are many Christians in the West, particularly here in the United States, that think that those are inseparable, you know? But what happens if you believe that for a long time, and then you start to find yourself having to do some pretty complex mental gymnastics to continue to defend what Israel is doing. And as you start to feel maybe that disconnect, a lot of that is moral injury. And I use Israel as one example, but there are many examples where people are starting to grapple with some of the things that they have, perhaps with the best of intentions, been supporters of for a long time.
Too little, too late. But anyway, what is Trump now doing that's not good?
Yeah. I feel like you asked that 40 minutes ago, and we talked. Great question. Okay, so here's what I think. I think that ultimately the plan by the nebulous they, who I think we've actually done a pretty good job of trying to talk around. We talked about the City of London, the RIIA, the CFR, some of these other organizations. So I think that the aim is to move us into what some people would call a technocracy, and I agree with that. Another way to maybe describe that would be kind of this idea of the digital control grid, because I do think that's where we're moving, where eventually we will all live in a society of much greater surveillance, much of which will be digital. It will be AI enhanced, etc. And I think that in the United States, and therefore kind of in the world, because the United States is such a significant player on the world stage, you need someone in power who can push this. And I think that's why you have Trump here, kind of in this almost like a warp speed 2.0 in a way. And so,
oh my God,
what I think that's going to look like is they're going to find inventive ways to get people to continue to opt in or be forced into some of these digital control measures. And I think some of those we can already see with the digital currencies. So I do think digital currencies are potentially problematic. I know that there are a lot of freedom-oriented people that do like, whether it's Bitcoin or some of the others. What I think is going to happen from the side of the government, though, is people are naturally resistant towards the CBDCs, the central bank digital currencies. And I think that they realize that. So they'll drop the central bank affiliation and they will offer a digital currency that is ostensibly privatized. But as we have seen, the line between, what's private and what's run by the government is becoming increasingly blurry, almost kind of like fascist in a way. So that's where I think that stuff is quite problematic. And then also another way in which they'll push this is just for the digital ID. Now, in the United States, that has been tied a lot to voting, because there is this idea in the United States that our voting problem has become expanded ever since the stolen election of 2020. You see how these things are linked. You've got our problems on the border. I think all this goes together, right? So you have a large illegal population, and then so under the guise of cleaning up voting, you can administer this voter ID, but in reality, it will be a digital ID. But I think these are just some of the ways in which they are going towards this digital control grid. Now, I think it does go one step further. And I'll tell you this. Now, this is a lot of conjecture on my part, and I understand that. But we just had an announcement that our Space Force, which is a new branch of service in our military, it's only a couple of years old, is going to move its headquarters to Alabama. So basically to Huntsville, Alabama, which is an area that is already has a lot of scientific investment in that area. And there are many people who say that this is a part of implementing what will be called the Golden Dome. And the Golden Dome is supposed to be something akin to Israel's Iron Dome, but here in the United States, and supposedly would provide some sort of, protective shields from adversaries, kind of like Israel's Iron Dome is supposed to. Now, there are other people who have another thought of what this Golden Dome may be, and they theorize that this will be like a digital surveillance shield that basically, will cover a lot of the, the continental United States, and then it will enable just greater tracking of Americans. And I think there's probably at least some validity to those who have those concerns about the Golden Dome.
Right. What can the average person do to resist all this?
That is the question. So here's what I would say. So one, first of all, at least recognize that, at least acknowledge it, because, everyone always says, what can we do? And first of all, that's a super valid question because we should be action oriented. However, I'm sure you get this critique a lot because I know I get it. You probably get people who say, hey, all you do is talk about the problem. I get people say that to me all the time. And my response to that is we're still in the phase of identify the problem because so few people have even identified it, or even appreciably understand it. So I think we do still have to talk about the problem because we do need...
You know what? The medical comparison would be, imagine someone's going around with cancer. Mm-hmm. Before you say like what you need to do to treat it, operation or whatever, you first need to acknowledge that you got cancer. It's like, dude, you got cancer.
Great point.
The guy doesn't even know he's got cancer. Like, how are you going to convince him to go see the doctor or try any therapies or fasting or whatever it is that you want to do, alternative treatments? How can you even get to the point where you discuss the options and everything when the person doesn't even know they've got cancer? Like,
great point.
That's the first place you start.
Absolutely. So it's a great point. But so we do still have to talk about identifying the problem because the majority of our countrymen, whether it's there or here or whether it's in other nations around the world, they're not there yet. However, having said that, going back to what you were talking about with the Star Trek, scorpion parasite, I do believe that there is something to be said for recognize that there is a parasite, in certain of these institutions. And we should bleed those institutions. Like those institutions to some degree should be bled dry. They should starve. And I'll give you an example. So
how exactly? How do we do that?
Yeah. So for example, there's a reason why I haven't sought to rejoin the military because I don't trust the institution. And a lot of people that are otherwise on my side, they want to get a lot of people in because they look at it as saying, but we need good people in the military. And my counter to that is, I understand where you're coming from, but I don't think it's enough because it's the institution at the top. It's that invisible command hierarchy, that invisible structure that is still going to completely control the government to include the military. So in my mind, it's like, I would rather... And I'm not saying I go around actively discouraging people to join, but I don't encourage people to join. And when asked, I do say, hey, I can't recommend military service at this time, because I would almost rather see the institution kind of be bled dry by people, refusing to join. And I will tell you, around American dinner tables at night, a conversation that is happening is people who did full careers, 20 plus year careers, retired from the military, are actively discouraging their teenage children from following in their footsteps. That is a conversation that is happening around American dinner tables right now. People who did full retired careers are saying, hey, I don't think you should follow in my footsteps right now. So, and I think that on the one hand, that is sad, and it's an indictment on the state of our military and our country, but I also totally get it. It's kind of necessary. So I think where you can remove your support and remove your consent, and I just use the military as just one example, I think we should do that.
Well, again, going back to the similarity with the medical world, I would say, I was in the system. I got to the point where I was head of the department for my orthopedics, and I realized there's nothing I could do to change it. young-eyed, bushy-tailed, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, young consultant who thought, yeah, I'm going to make all these changes and make things for better. I came up against the wall.
Yeah.
And I realized I would smash my brains out trying to get through it. It was not going to work. Like, I get it. People say, like, well, if all the good people leave, then you're just leaving it to the bad people and, infiltrate it and change it. Yeah, to a point. But you can't infiltrate it just on your own. Like, these people have infiltrated it through their Freemasonry and Illuminati and secret societies. Their networks, they're highly organized. They are, captured and they're driven and they're ideologically, focused.
And they've done it over a period of centuries, if not longer.
So you on your own own some, like with no friends, no networks, no common agenda or plan or vision. What the fuck are you going to do? What the fuck are you going to infiltrate? You're infiltrating nothing. You're going to spend your life getting bogged down, stressed out, and going back to that Star Trek analogy, they know who's got the little thing in their head or not. They know who's got the scorpion little fucking parasite. They will know that you're not one of them. And your life will become very difficult or stressed out and you have to leave. Or either you have to fake it and become like them. And so all in all, you'll end up being like them anyway. So the systems will weed you out. You can't survive. You can't thrive in those environments, which is why I left the public health system. And then I thought in my delusion that, I'll go full-time private and I'll be able to be autonomous and do things the way I want. But I didn't factor in, actually, this virus infects not just the public health system, but the private health system too. Like, why would Big Pharma not infiltrate everything? Why would the government not have their stupid rules and institutions affecting the private sector? Why would the regulatory body not have its tentacles in there as well? Like, the blob is everywhere. So I ran out of one place thinking it'll be fine in another place. And then I realized it's there as well. And it was like a straitjacket, and the moment you start speaking out, causing a bit of trouble, the blob comes for you. These little people with the scorpions, they can't have you. They want to get you out,
Yeah. This is kind of what happened to me. This is the difference between my response after 9/11. So which happened around 2007, I was telling you before, when I kind of woke up as to what happened with 9/11. And now I start to question everything because I went to the military academy. I'm in the Army. I already had one deployment to Afghanistan under my belt at the time that I was discovering all this. And now I'm questioning, well, should I be in the Army? Like, what do I do? But what I told myself was, well, the military still needs good people in. And this is so fast forward though to 2020 with COVID. And the reason I still did not subscribe to that same mode of thinking was because I realized this is so much bigger than I thought it was. And that's what changed my mind. And that's what made me realize good people on the inside, like it's not enough. And I thought I can probably do more on the outside than I can do, on the inside. So here we are.
Yeah. All right. Yeah,
I will say this. So just back to your question about what do we do? So there are some who say, and I don't know how I feel about this, but I can appreciate the idea. There are some who say that those who, try to run the planet and control the assets of the world, and those who orchestrated COVID, they would say they went too far too fast, and they kind of they overstepped, their own bounds. I don't know if that's true or not, but whatever. But I can understand the idea. But I do think that what happened with the COVID operation was so big that it did wake a lot of people up that beforehand weren't awake at all. Now, unfortunately, many of them have gone back to sleep, but not everyone. There are people who a couple of years ago would think that you and I are crazy, and now they don't. And there are people that I know that are as far along on this path as I am, and they've been on it a much shorter time because they realized what was happening with COVID, and then they got real educated real fast because they realized they needed to. So I do think that there are people that are kind of snapping out of the trance. And when they snap out of the trance, they have to kind of know where to go so that they don't feel alone and isolated, atomized. And that's why I think it's so important that you're doing what you do and other people, because some of these people are just kind of floating around and they're like, because, what happens a lot of times is you get isolated by your friends, your colleagues, your coworkers, and in some cases your family, and in some extreme cases, maybe even your spouse, And so people kind of need to know where to go, where they can find good information, but also just find other people who have tried to, or who have had to travel down that same road and realize, no, you're not crazy. People may think that you're crazy, but it's just because in some cases you're a couple of years ahead of other people who may eventually wake up. They're just not there yet.
Find your tribe.
Yeah.
Raise awareness, bleed them dry, find your tribe. And then, I need to write a Substack on actionable steps. That's a good place to start.
Yeah, it's hard because in the what actions to take, it is such a necessary question. But I think what people have to realize is there's no, first of all, I think a lot of people who ask that question still don't have a full appreciation of the problem. So it can be a little bit annoying, but that doesn't mean the question isn't valid. It is a valid question. But even in asking it, we also have to understand, one, there are no risk-free options. And two, there are no easy solutions. There's no like 1, 2, 3, do this, and then, world saved. I mean, it's not quite going to be that way.
Not happening. Dude, I need to wrap up because I need to put my boy to sleep. It's been wonderful.
Yeah.
It's been wonderful.
This has been great.
No, it's been wonderful. And you're going to come back next year. I love chatting to you. I'm sure we'll have tons to talk about next year. But listen.
Yeah, sounds great.
The final question, you need to answer it still. I think the last episode was behind the paywall, so you need to do this one. Again, you're on your deathbed, your loved ones are around you before you meet your maker. What words of wisdom and advice would you give them?
Yeah. Okay, here's what I would say. I would say learn to challenge your own assumptions. So here's something that I feel like I've grappled a lot with in life. And I think that this applies to everything that we have spoken about today, but it can also be applied very broadly in all aspects of life. And so never get so wedded to your beliefs. And I'm not saying that means don't have strongly held beliefs. That is not what I'm saying. But always feel comfortable refining your worldview and even asking yourself the tough questions. And I think that what that will do is it will make you smarter. But even in saying that it will make you smarter, I think more specifically, it will make you more wise, which I think is a very specific subset of just in general being smart, So yeah, that's what I would say. Learn to challenge your own assumptions.
That's great. Now I'm thinking what assumptions I need to challenge, right? I'll go away and think about that. What assumptions do I need to challenge? Yeah, it makes your head hurt though, thinking about that.
It does.
Because you think, I don't have any assumptions, but of course we do.
Well, you know what? So I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but I'm sure it has. People may say, "Oh, you're so close-minded," and I think that is the dumbest critique for people like you or me, because people who have kind of rejected all the old narratives and have totally moved beyond that, you can't do that if you're a closed-minded person. Because somewhere along the way, you had to reject many things that you once held to be almost axiomatic. That is anything but closed-minded. So anyway.
Yeah. No, very, very good point. Very, very good point. Yeah, I love you, man. I love chatting to you. But we speak Likewise. Over the phone before, like, next year for sure.
Sure. Yeah. Sounds great. Thanks for everything that you're doing. I appreciate it.
Oh man, thank you very much. Yeah, sometimes I think, are we getting anywhere? But yeah, we have to. We have to keep plugging on. There's no other option. We have to do this. All right, my friend, you have a wonderful day. Thank you so much at the last minute doing this. I think we spoke 2 weeks ago. I can't remember now when we had our lovely chat. But your podcast is coming out. It's maybe coming out tomorrow, but because I'm just back from my birthday bash quite late, it's probably going to be coming out Monday. But I reached out to you because I was like, oh, geez, dude, I feel like we're missing like a little bit of commentary on this whole Charlie Kirk business. And you're like, kindly said, yep, get me back on. So I'm not going to do much talking after this. I'd love you to talk about it. I do want to say, I didn't know much about Charlie Kirk. I did see some of the stuff in the past, and I thought, oh God, he's a bit too right-wing and pro-Zionist for my liking. And then he flipped. Then he started asking, like recently I looked at some of his videos, he was changing his tune. He was asking some very uncomfortable questions to Ben Shapiro about what's going on in Israel and Gaza and the influence of Israel and America. And then apparently he's dead. Now, I don't know the circumstances, but I feel really sorry if it's the case that he died, because he's got a young family, he's got a wife, he's a human being, he's allowed to have his opinions. And I think it's, if he did die, it's a real tragedy and it's very sad. And I'm actually quite disgusted at the people on the internet celebrating his death. I just think it just goes to show you how dehumanized so many people are in this world. Like to cheer someone else's death. I mean, if you disagree with them or you think they're a bad person, like, okay, just leave it at that. But like to cheer on and in a very disgusting way kind of celebrate someone else's demise and suffering of the family, it's a bit sick and twisted. Anyway, that's enough from my point of view. Dude, what the hell happened there? Well, I love your take on things, so go for it.
Yeah, so I'll tell you kind of my take on things. I think it's been 3 days since it happened, right? So at least as of right now, when you and I are recording it, it's been 3 days. So with anything that happens like this, I think it's important, one, to not jump to any conclusions, to just keep an open mind, wait for more information to kind of start to come out, and then above all, keep a cool head, which is the exact opposite of what a lot of people are doing right now, which is immediately dividing into two camps, which is kind of why these things happen in the first place. So, but I'll tell you where I'm at right now, kind of what I'm thinking. As always, I may change my mind. All of us should be open-minded enough to, if we receive more evidence or more information that pushes into another direction, we should feel comfortable kind of changing our ideas on that. But here's what I see right now. So if you ask me kind of what happened, let me take that and let me break that down into a couple of other questions. And I will start by saying I knew who Charlie Kirk was. I did not really closely follow him, and in fact, I kind of thought he was a little bit of a goober, and just a little bit too kind of plain vanilla Republican for my taste. And I don't necessarily like those types of labels, because I think the whole left-right thing is largely an unhelpful construct. So even though I tend to personally identify more with people on the right, that's true. I still, when I see people immediately divide into these two camps, left versus right, which is exactly what's happening right now, I see that as kind of, well, that may have been one of the intended objectives of, this act. But anyway, so I take the question of, all right, what happened? And I kind of break it down into a couple of questions. So one is, who exactly is Charlie Kirk? Who's behind him? Who financed him? Who financed his organization, which is Turning Point USA? So that's kind of one series of questions. Another's might be, is this real? Is he dead? Now, I think we have to ask that question. You and I have spoken several times now about this supposed, what you and I both think was a staged assassination attempt with Donald Trump. So I think we have to ask that question. I tend to think right now that this was real, that what we saw was real. I do believe that Charlie Kirk has passed. You could perhaps convince me to change my mind on that. I do think we are entering an era in which it will become incredibly difficult to look at something that we see in a video and then assess its authenticity. So I'm not saying 100% he's dead, but that's kind of the way I'm leaning right now, is that I do believe it was real. I do believe that, whomever intended to kill him, that it was real, that they did kill him. And then that leads me to the next series of questions is, well, who did it and why? So if I kind of look at that and say, all right, I don't pretend to know a lot about Charlie Kirk or who was behind him. We know he was very young. He was 31 years old. He had a family. At least ostensibly, he was very conservative. He was an outspoken Christian. He seemed to support family values. He was very close to Donald Trump. And clearly, I mean, some people say that they credit him with part of Donald Trump's campaign success in last year's election. So he's very close to the Trump family and to the Trump campaign. For me, that does give me cause for concern. I can't say one way or the other, but I do have questions about who financed him, what the role of his organization was. And I will tell you, one of the reasons I didn't follow him closely was because I just always kind of considered his organization to probably be controlled opposition. Now, I could be wrong on that, or it could be one of those situations where I do believe that there are a lot of people who we might call controlled opposition, and they themselves may be totally sincere, and they just don't necessarily know that they've been kind of maneuvered along into a specific direction. So could that describe Charlie Kirk? I mean, 31 years old is I mean, I do believe he was very eloquent. He was very articulate with his positions, regardless of whether or not I agreed with everything that he said. You mentioned a lot of his Zionist positions, and I'll address that in just a moment. So I certainly didn't agree with everything that he said, but I did agree with a lot of what he said. But again, I never followed him super closely. So, yeah, I do have questions about who financed him. And then I also have questions about how whenever he would seem to attack or go after certain things that are happening in American society, he tended to always blame the left. Now, believe me, there are plenty of reasons to blame the left, but there are a lot of problems that come from the right too. I do believe that a lot of the left is comprised of crazies. I do believe a lot of chaos comes from the left, but I'll tell you right now, I think the rise in technocracy is being supported by the right. I mean, this is one of the roles that I think Trump is playing. Look at what Trump did with warp speed. Why Trump? Biden would have never gotten warp speed to go. I mean, people would have rejected it, right? Well, now look at what's happening with, I mean, we have a government that is largely subsidized and managed by Palantir and other assorted corporations. There's a lot that the right can do, and that individuals that consider themselves to be on the right will support that the other side wants. So, I mean, it's kind of, there's this tension sometimes that occurs dialectically, and why I think that is done deliberately with these types of ops that are carried out. So I do believe that this was an op. I do believe that this was a planned and executed hit. Some people have gone through and they have done some analysis on some of maybe the occult elements of the hit. I do believe that those are relevant. I'm not necessarily the expert there, but I do believe that has relevance. Some people have looked at where it happened on the college campus, which was Utah Valley University. They've looked at the layout kind of geometrically. Some of the other numerological symbolism that may have been prevalent as well, and some of the intended messaging. I think there may be something to that. I think we've seen some messaging that, again, would perhaps suggest that this was planned and executed. And if so, then it was planned and executed not by some young kid or whomever, but a group of people that have power and influence and can carry out these types of operations. So if you remember, when this first happened, they arrested somebody right after the shooting occurred. Then we find out, and it was an older gentleman, they released that guy, and now they have taken into custody a young man whose name is Tyler Robinson, I believe. Do I believe that this was the individual that shot Charlie Kirk? No. Could he have been involved in some capacity? Will he just be the fall guy, the patsy? I don't know. But to me, this kind of looks like, and again, we're only 3 days into this whole thing happening, but to me, Tyler Robinson looks kind of like a Lee Harvey Oswald, if we were just to draw the parallel with the JFK assassination. The Israel connection. So if you and I were having this conversation just a couple weeks ago and Charlie Kirk were to come up, I would tell you, Charlie Kirk, kind of a plain vanilla Republican. I don't follow him closely. I agree with a lot of what he says, but he's very pro-Israel. He makes it a point to say he's very pro-Israel. But some people have said, hey, he was starting to change his opinions on that, and he was starting to maybe change his mind with some aspects on Israel. And I think that's true. I don't necessarily know to what extent it was. My understanding, and I could be wrong on this, is that his organization may have donors. I don't know if they're necessarily in Israel, but I've heard people at least suspect, or maybe other people have said, he has either Zionist donors or Jewish donors. That may very well be. I don't necessarily know. But he was very close with Israel. He had traveled to Israel many times. He would speak about that. I believe he even was somewhat close to Netanyahu himself. How close, I don't necessarily know. But I do know that he did start to question, or at least ask some questions about the October 7th attack. And even he had expressed concern at the primary narrative about October 7th, because he had said, hey, Israel is a fortress. The whole country is a fortress. And the IDF is, so large and massive, compared with the population of the whole country. And
he said, I heard him. He said, the country is the IDF.
Yeah. And he said, was there a stand down order? So he was, but when he would make those comments, he would say, hey, listen, I'm pro-Israel, but we've got to ask these questions. So I don't know. Did he go off script? Did he go off the reservation? I don't know. No, I will tell you what I think about Israel, whether it's the Israeli government, Netanyahu, Mossad, I'm not one of these guys, and I think we spoke about this before, but I'm not one of these guys that thinks that Israel runs the world. I think that they're kind of a vassal of the larger empire that kind of runs everything. But I do believe that, I think we're kind of supposed to believe that Israel runs the world. I think maybe that's one of the ways in which the true powers, mask themselves. So is it possible that Israel killed him? I would say, yeah, it's possible. Is it possible that Israel killed him because Israel wanted him gone? Maybe. Or is it possible that Israel killed him because they were tasked to do so by, whoever it is that kind of pulls the strings in Israel, and that we're supposed to draw the conclusion that Israel killed him? So I don't know. In questioning Israel, did he turn enough against Israel to make Israel want to kill him? Or is that part of, because there's part of me that thinks that they maybe want us to think that Israel killed him. And I'll tell you another thing, because this kind of goes into another idea that I've had for a while. For a long time, you could not openly criticize Israel. You would be canceled, you would be deplatformed, etc. And now it's becoming a lot more, I don't want to say fashionable, that's not the right way, but a lot more people are criticizing Israel. And to some degree, I wonder if that is also intentional. If Israel if part of the role that Israel is now playing is actually to take more heat, just with everything that's going on in Gaza, everything that happened with the 12-day war. More recently now, Israel had an attack on a negotiations team that was in Doha, Qatar, a couple of days ago. They caught, a lot of heat, and rightfully so for that. So is this another event that's supposed to be attributed to Israel because Israel is kind of supposed to serve as a lightning rod right now? I don't know. That's just a theory. But anyway, kind of a lot of me rambling, but those are some of the thoughts that I have right now as to what's going on with this whole incident about Charlie.
Yeah, well, there's a lot to unpack there, my friend. It's funny, I just hear you speak and I think, wow, you think so similarly to me. It's unbelievable. But anyway, yeah, I saw something about him having 3 caps with 47. I think is that the 47th president or something like that? But
yeah, so I've seen that photo, so I think that's true. If you catch the photo, there's a photo of him that is from the side, right?
Mm.
And there's a table to his side, and on that table are rows of caps. The caps have a 47 on there, which
there's 3 of them. There's 3 of them.
That's right. There's 3 rows. There's 3 rows. The caps just have a big 47 on them. The 47 ostensibly is for the 47th administration, which is, Trump's administration. Now, you have a very informed audience, so some of them may understand the Masonic significance of the number 47, but it also goes, that's one element of it. But another thing is, and people have mentioned that as soon as Trump won the election and was going to be the 47th president, there were people already drawing this parallel between.
No. So I'm not that well informed. So what is 47 in Masonic? Because all I know is 4 + 7 = 11, and three 11s gives you 33. And 33 is a Masonic number. So where's this 47 come in?
Yeah. So that's true about the 33. The 3 rows of caps, 4 + 7 is 11, 3 rows, 33. 33 is a number that a lot of people recognize. And 33s have been showing up all over the place in this event. 47 is a little bit less well known. So 47, I'm not a Mason, but the importance to Freemasonry, as I understand it, is there is this idea that's very prominent in Freemasonry about the 47th problem of Euclid, which is related to the Pythagorean theorem. So people who have studied Masonry at all, they do know that Masonry is that geometry features very prominently in Masonry. And the higher up you go, as I understand it, the more levels of meaning, some of which are quite esoteric, that some of these geometric principles may take on. And so so that's kind of where the 47 features in. So kind of like the 33, sometimes the 47 is a number which can be featured in some sort of event like this, almost as a calling card as to, hey, there's a ritualistic aspect of this, or maybe even a hat tip as to who may have been involved or whatever.
Okay. So then a couple of things I also want to say, and then I'll let you jump back in. But so, for example, the idea that some old guy shot him and then he was let off is just ridiculous. And two, I think the idea of the lefties, to me, they are crazy people on SSRIs. I mean, I'm caricaturing, with dyed hair, 300 pounds, eating too much, transgender. The idea of them getting a rifle, because they're not gun people, and then shooting this guy with a rifle through his neck in a clear-cut assassination attempt. First round, bang. I don't know many lefties like that could pull it off. I think the idea of saying it was a lefty person, crazy lefty trans person, is just ridiculous. This was clearly a high-level professional hit job. And then the next thing is seriously, they couldn't find him, and he just disappeared. And the guy that they got initially was look here, and then while everyone's looking there, this guy just disappears. And then suddenly they've got this kid, and he's jumped off a roof. Apparently, he's left a rifle in the woods. Why would you do that? The scope is set too far back. The round chamber size that they're saying that it is, would have actually blown his neck open if that was the case. It goes on, and the grandmother's come out saying, there's no way my grandson could have done this. He's not that kind of guy, and he's won a scholarship or something. There's so many irregularities. And then there are people saying that there was a private jet that flew out, and what the hell? You say with time, truth will come out. I agree. Look, I agree that, one of the things I said was everybody needs to keep their head together. And one of my listeners made a great point. And she said, look, a lot of people die mysteriously at home, suicide attempts, die on their own, or sudden death, or whatever. And we never really get to know anything. We suspect they were, knocked off, but we don't know. This was a public message. The target was actually all of us. I love the fact she said that. The target is all of us. We are the target. And it was to create this massive emotional, war between one side and another side, and whipping up the frenzy and the angst. Sure. And you listen to Matt Walsh, and this is a war on us, and we need to take action. It's like building up this energy towards something. That was the purpose. So this was a high, and someone else has also said, look, this was a message to say, look, we are so powerful, we can take out whoever we want. Maybe the warning to other people, look, if you stray out of line, you get knocked off. There's all these possibilities, but the reality is, in this kind of short-term frame, there's no point getting excited. I always say, whenever you are being shown something or you hear something that makes you emotional, angry, anxious, you're being manipulated. That's a psyop. And to me, this is a psyop. Whether he was dead or not, or is fake or not, the whole thing is a psyop. But the question is, will we ever get to the truth? Because we never got to the truth of JFK. We never. It doesn't seem to we're getting to the truth of COVID or 9/11 or whatever. Yeah, even the Trump assassination attempt. You know, I mean, have we really got to the bottom of it? I just feel like we never get to the bottom of these things, do we?
You're right. You're right. And in fact, I saw a lot of people that I'm friends with as well, and they were expressing concern at all of the people, primarily on the left, who were either mocking or cheering Charlie's death. Now, I think it's right to express concern over all these individuals, because of course that's very sickening to cheer that someone has died, regardless of what you even think about the person.
Yeah.
However, there's part of me that says, hey, you're concerned about all these people that are mocking Charlie Kirk, and you're probably right to be concerned about those people mocking Charlie Kirk. But have you expressed the same outrage over those highly placed individuals in the U.S. government that on Thursday mocked the victims of 9/11 by continuing to push all the false narratives on the 24th on the 24th anniversary of 9/11? Because in some ways they're doing the exact same thing. Where's your outrage? Because there's some inconsistency there. So if we're going to align with truth, let's be aligned with truth, and let's embrace it fully, and let's not fear the truth. So, a little bit of inconsistency in messaging there. But again, I don't know exactly. I don't pretend to know who Charlie Kirk was in real life, who he was truthfully. I think he said a lot of good things. I think he may have been a very sincere person. I don't necessarily know. I do have questions as to who was behind him, who funded him. Maybe he didn't know in the beginning. He was very young. I mean, he was 31 when he died, but he was 18 which again, I do have questions about. An 18-year-old that starts this organization that becomes, as big and as powerful as it was. I mean, we should ask questions about that. Now, there are other people that have said he was in the club, he was in the inner circles. I don't know. That may be, maybe that's not. Maybe he was used. He was kind of co-opted and used against his will, and maybe he kind of started to realize it, or at least realize it on the Israel front. I don't know, but I do believe that he was, whatever you want to call it, he was knocked off, he was sacrificed. I do believe it was an op. I do believe there was a ritual aspect to it. And I do believe that it was done with at least one of the objectives to be, splitting the people and having them divide and then turn at each other instead of turning at those who perpetrate such actions against all of us.
Yeah. Listen, I agree about he's 18. I mean, that's seriously young. Very, very young. And you just have to wonder, was he being groomed? Was he groomed into this role? It's just very strange. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, there could be just exceptional people. Sometimes that happens,
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, I don't know who he was. I don't know what's going on. But the whole thing to me just sucks. I mean, it sounds like the deep state apparatus did a psyop on the anniversary of a massive psyop.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of sick if you think about it.
Very.
So it's almost like they're taunting us. So instead of anyone talking about 9/11 or celebrating the 24th anniversary, or whatever it was, we're just distracted by this other psyop. This very sick, gory.
Let me say one thing before we close here, because you just reminded me of something. So, and we have to remember that not that long before Charlie was shot, everybody in the U.S. was talking about the Ukrainian girl, the refugee who had come over and then was stabbed in the neck a couple of times in Charlotte, North Carolina, not that far away from where I grew up. So I do believe that these are related. Now, again, what about that incident? Because there are people that are saying that gal was a crisis actress. Again, I don't know. It's so hard to know what we're looking at now.
I know.
But regardless, I do believe that all of this was connected. The timing with respect to 9/11, like you just mentioned, those two incidents. And I do believe that what happened with this, I believe her name was Irina, but what happens there, it almost seems that was done and timed. The video comes out. Everyone is in a frenzy about that. And it's almost like we achieve a fever pitch and then bam, Charlie Kirk is shot. You know?
It was primed. It was like getting us pumped, Yeah. I mean, I agree. And it's just funny. The video angles were fantastic. It was like everything came out. Suddenly everything was available. All these kind of images. And it's like, wow.
Yeah.
and everybody's naturally, obviously, absolutely disgusted and sick to see anyone get murdered. But it's again, it's whipping up that whole, look at this, the big bag bogey black man, killing this beautiful blonde girl. And, then there's a war against white people. I mean, I wish there kind of is. It's just inflaming the tension, the angst.
Inflaming. Yeah. And then, of course, because, we have the public is just so easily conditioned. It's as if they know, you introduce this stimulus into the system to elicit this exact response. And the people predictably respond exactly the way that they want us to respond. They immediately lose their mind and look for an enemy. But the enemy is never those that are perpetrating this against all of us. It's, the left or, the right, So we got to get people to kind of break out of that.
Yeah, and the funny thing is some people think I'm left and some people think I'm right. I'm neither. I'm not left or right. I don't believe in that anymore. I'm very conservative. I believe in conserving things that have worked for centuries, the family unit, family values, community values, and traditions, things that just work, respecting normal biology, stuff like that.
Sure.
Does that make me right wing? I don't believe in mass migration. I believe in the nation state and the government, and not the government, the country, and preserving that and not having a one world government. Does that make me right wing? I don't believe in vaccines or climate change. Maybe that makes me right wing. I mean, I don't know. But it's but at the same time, I criticize all these so-called right-wing pundits who are very happy to point at the low-level people, but never actually point at who's organizing everything. For example, so Tommy Robinson did a march today in London, and he does a lot of good stuff. He says a lot of good stuff, but he doesn't ever talk about Agenda 2030. He doesn't ever talk about the WHO. He doesn't talk about the vaccines, mandates, lockdowns, digital ID, technocracy. And he never points at who's engineering the multi-billion global logistical effort of mass migration and who's actually behind it. And he would just say, left-leaning politicians are to blame. No, it's not. Politicians are actors. They work for other people.
That's right.
And and then even there's questions between him and links with Mossad and actually one of his organizations that he was involved with, English Defence League. If you look at Companies House, the records, at one point it's actually called the English and Jewish Defence League. It's kind of bizarre. And then they changed, this far right, typically anti-Semitic neo-Nazi group was actually labeled the English and Jewish Defence League, which was really kind of bizarre. But anyway, but the problem is that's what they should have with Tommy, so you take people and say, isn't mass migration terrible? Isn't it terrible how they're eroding our country and our values, which is all true. But then he doesn't actually point to the people who are actually organizing it and engineering it, and he fails to touch on the other topics, which is why I feel like these kind of right-wing commentators or influencers are actually more dangerous because they're distracting us from really who is the problem. And then some people call me left-wing for saying things like this. And I'm like, I'm nothing, man. I'm just trying to figure out the nonsense in this world.
Yeah, I hear you. But I agree. I get the same comments, but I do agree that even though I tend to identify far more with people that would consider themselves on the right, sometimes I think that it's the right that causes at least as many problems as the left, and sometimes even more. And I am adamant that it will be the right that will support and cheerlead, the technocracy as it comes,
Oh, all right. Well, listen, thank you very much for your take and perspective.
Brother. Appreciate it.
It's always, as usual, very balanced, very rational, very reasonable, and not emotional, which is what it should be. Like, it's too much frenzy. And, I don't know about you, but I get just a bit disappointed. Thankfully, I haven't had much time to go on X. Haven't been posting that much, but the few times I go up, it's just all over. It's like this tension and aggro and and you're either seeing people dancing and celebrating Charlie Kirk's death, or you're people frothing the mouth and we need to do something about these lefties and these liberals, and it's like I think that's all by design. They actually want to do that.
That's right.
That's what they want to create. All right, brother. Well, listen, it's very
Hey,
late
thanks,
here.
man.
Night, night. Thank you so much, and we'll speak again soon.
All right.
as
Have a
always.
good one.
I, Ahmed Malik, am a private civilian protected by the Geneva Convention. My Substack, social media posts, and podcasts are my personal experiences, observations, and opinions. This information is for educational purposes only. Although I am a doctor, I am not your doctor, and I am not providing medical or legal advice to you or to the wider public. I am not licensed or registered with the GMC or any other licensing board. The responsibility for the interpretation, due diligence, and use of the information from my Substack and my podcast lies with you, the viewer and or listener. Please do your research and use your discernment. It is not my intention to harass, intimidate, offend, defame, conspire, blackmail, coerce, or cause anxiety, alarm, or distress to any man or woman, and the information presented here is done so with peaceful and honourable intentions. Enjoy, folks.